Friends, if you want to watch one of the greatest and most unforgettable movies in cinematic history, then The Godfather, 1972, is an absolute must. And if you're hearing about it for the first time, or even if you've seen it a dozen times, today's video is made just for you. Make sure to watch till the very end, because we're going to talk about everything that makes this film an everlasting classic. And if you've just landed on our channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because we've got more amazing film content coming your way. In today's video, we're diving into the world of The Godfather, a film that didn't just entertain, it changed the way people saw movies forever. We're going to explore what The Godfather actually is, how it became a phenomenon, and why it continues to be talked about decades later. You'll find out where and how you can watch this masterpiece, whether it's streaming on a popular OTT platform or scheduled for a rerun on a classic movie channel. So if you've been wondering how to experience this legendary film in the best way possible, we've got you covered. But that's just the beginning. We'll also talk about the movie's technical department, the stunning cinematography, the shadowy lighting, the brilliant use of silence, and the unforgettable score that gives The Godfather its chilling atmosphere. The music alone deserves its own spotlight, and trust me, we'll get to that. We'll go behind the scenes and uncover what went into pre-production, from casting debates to the behind-the-scenes battles that shaped the final product. We'll touch on the filming process itself, where the tension wasn't just on screen. Sometimes it was happening between the actors and the director too. Then there's post-production, where the real magic of editing and scoring brought the film together into the iconic story we know today. Of course, no breakdown would be complete without talking about the numbers. We'll discuss the film's budget, how much it cost to bring Don Vito Corleone to life, and how The Godfather went on to shatter box office records and become one of the most financially successful films of its era. We'll look at how it was received by critics and audiences, how it swept through award season, and why even now, it's still studied in film schools around the world. We'll also take a deep dive into the story itself. What makes the plot so compelling? Why does it still resonate? I'll give you a spoiler-free overview, along with a short review that captures the emotional intensity, the tension, and the power dynamics that make The Godfather more than just a gangster movie. It's a family saga, a Shakespearean tragedy, and a cultural mirror all rolled into one. And yes, we're definitely talking about the cast. We'll break down each major performance, from Marlon Brando's unforgettable turn as Don Corleone to Al Pacino's slow-burning transformation as Michael. Who played who, and how did their roles help shape the film's legendary status? We'll look at how the performances elevated the script and made these characters feel so painfully real. On top of all this, we'll sprinkle in some fascinating facts and little-known trivia that will blow your mind. Did you know Brando's audition wasn't even a formal audition? Or that the studio almost didn't want him in the film? We've got stories like that and more. So friends, if you're even a little curious about what makes The Godfather one of the greatest films of all time, then don't go anywhere. Stick with us as we take you deep into the heart of a cinematic legend. Let's get started. The story of The Godfather doesn't just unfold, it creeps up on you, pulling you into a world so intricately built and emotionally layered that you almost forget it's a story about organized crime. On the surface, it seems like a conventional tale of a powerful mafia family, but beneath that, it operates as a haunting portrait of a family being torn apart from within, all while appearing to grow stronger. It's Shakespearean in its sweep, operatic in its emotions, and deeply American in its themes of ambition, legacy, and corruption. What starts at a family celebration slowly unravels into a tragedy of identity, loyalty, and transformation. The film opens with a wedding, and not just any wedding, it's the wedding of Don Vito Corleone's daughter. This scene is like stepping into a grand theater production. You're immediately immersed in Italian-American tradition, power dynamics, and family politics. While the music and laughter echo outside, inside the Don's office, we witness him conducting business in hushed tones. Favors are asked, promises are made, and you begin to see the quiet, terrifying respect this man commands. It's one of the most effective opening sequences in film history, not because of action, but because of the atmosphere, the tension in the small details, the soft dialogue that somehow feels louder than gunfire. Right from the start, it becomes clear that this movie isn't in a hurry. It wants you to sit with the characters, understand their codes, and feel the weight of every word they speak. The story seems linear, but the emotional architecture is far more complex. The key to understanding the narrative is through the character of Michael Corleone. When we first meet him, Michael is the good son, the clean-cut outsider. He's a war hero, educated, Americanized, and clearly not interested in the family business. He's the kind of man who brings his girlfriend Kay to the wedding and casually tells her, "That's my family, Kay, not me." But The Godfather is a story of erosion, of how time, violence, and family obligation can break a person down and rebuild them into something unrecognizable. The first big turning point comes with the assassination attempt on Don Vito. This act doesn't just wound the patriarch, it sends a shockwave through the family structure. Suddenly, the Corleones are vulnerable. Sonny, the eldest son, is impulsive and violent, more of a brawler than a strategist. Tom Hagen, the adopted consigliere, is smart and calm, but doesn't have the bloodline or ruthlessness to lead. The family begins to fracture under pressure. And out of this chaos, unexpectedly, comes Michael. His arc is the heartbeat of the film. He steps into the fray reluctantly at first, purely out of love and protection for his father. But that decision leads him down a path of no return. The restaurant scene where Michael kills Sollozzo and Captain McCluskey is the fulcrum of the entire movie. It's not a flashy action sequence. It's quiet, drawn out, nerve-wracking. Watching Michael in that moment, the inner struggle, the fear, the exact second when he flips the switch and commits to the kill, you witness his transformation begin. He doesn't just kill two men. He kills the version of himself that believed he could stay out of this world. From that moment on, he is in it, entirely. After the murders, Michael flees to Sicily, where the narrative takes a detour, yet somehow, this peaceful stretch is even more tragic. Michael finds brief happiness, marries a local woman, Apollonia, and then loses her in a car bomb meant for him. It's a brutal reminder that even in exile, violence follows him. Meanwhile, back in New York, things get bloodier. Sonny is gunned down in a public ambush, a turning point that pushes Don Vito to reconsider everything. The aging Don begins to recognize that revenge only breeds more death, and he tries to forge peace between the families. But even he knows that Michael's rise is inevitable. One of the most quietly powerful moments in the story comes when Don Vito and Michael sit in the garden and talk about the future. Vito warns Michael that whoever approaches him to arrange a meeting with the rival Don is the traitor. It's not a dramatic scene, but the weight of legacy and regret hangs over every word. This is a father passing the crown to his son, not with pride, but with sorrow. After Vito's death, Michael becomes the head of the family, and here's where the film turns fully operatic. The famous baptism sequence is one of cinema's most brilliant uses of parallel editing. While Michael stands in church as godfather to his sister's child, renouncing Satan in the ceremony, his enemies are being executed one by one on his orders. The soft sound of the priest's words blends with the chaos of murder, and in that moment, Michael becomes the very thing he once claimed he never wanted to be. It's not just the rise of a new dawn, it's the spiritual death of Michael Corleone. The final moments are a quiet gut punch. Kay, now Michael's wife, confronts him about his involvement in a murder. He lies, of course. She tries to believe him. But then she watches from the doorway as Michael's men enter the room, kiss his hand, and call him Don Corleone. The door closes on her face. Literally. The camera stays on her expression, and the weight of the entire film lands in that one image. The door closing is more than just physical, it's symbolic. Michael is gone. Not dead, but unreachable. And the tragedy is complete. What makes the narrative so effective is that it never feels rushed. It allows each character and each scene to breathe, to grow, to simmer. It follows a traditional structure but uses silence, timing, and subtle shifts in power to build tension. It doesn't rely on plot twists or flashy gimmicks. Instead, it places you inside a world and lets you feel the gravity of every action, every betrayal, every moment of hesitation. In the end, The Godfather is less about crime and more about consequence. It's a story that begins with celebration and ends with isolation. A story that takes a reluctant outsider and turns him into a feared leader. And it does all of this with a narrative that feels both grand in scale and intimate in detail, like a family album soaked in blood and sealed with silence. The character development in The Godfather is one of the richest and most intricate in all of cinema. Every character in this story is a universe of contradictions, shaped by loyalty, ambition, love, and an unrelenting code of honor. What's remarkable is how the film doesn't just present its characters as part of a crime family. It strips them bare, showing us their fears, their desires, their weaknesses, and the inevitable consequences of their choices. The film doesn't rush anyone's evolution. It gives them space to grow, to shift, to be corrupted, and in some cases, to completely transform. Watching these characters is like watching chess pieces on a board, but each one believes they're moving of their own free will, even as the game traps them deeper and deeper. Let's begin with Michael Corleone, the beating heart of the film. At first glance, he seems like the last person you'd expect to become the new Godfather. When he first appears at the wedding, he's not in a tailored suit like his brothers. He's in a military uniform. He's clean-cut, polite, reserved, an outsider, both in attitude and in appearance. He's the golden boy, the war hero, the American dream personified. He proudly tells Kay, "That's my family, Kay, not me." And we believe him. He believes it too. But that's the genius of Michael's arc, watching him slowly and almost silently unravel everything he once stood for. He doesn't fall. He sinks inch by inch. Michael doesn't jump into the family business for power or wealth. He's pulled in by circumstance, by duty, and ultimately by revenge. It starts when his father is nearly assassinated. Then his brother Sonny is murdered. Each blow chips away at the distance he tried to maintain. When Michael agrees to assassinate Sollozzo and McCluskey, it's a defining moment not just for the story, but for him as a man. The bathroom scene where he retrieves the hidden gun and walks out into his new life is played with haunting tension. From that moment on, Michael stops reacting and starts controlling. He becomes cold, composed, and calculating. And by the end of the film, he's not only taken over the family, he's redefined it. His transformation from reluctant outsider to ruthless leader is not just compelling, it's chilling. Because we watched it happen step by step, and we understand exactly how he got there. Now contrast Michael with his father, Don Vito Corleone. Vito is already a legend by the time the film starts. He doesn't shout. He doesn't threaten. He whispers, he reasons, he makes people feel heard, then he makes them an offer they can't refuse. He's a criminal, yes, but there's a strange morality to him. He protects his own. He has rules. He has boundaries. And beneath that quiet strength is a man who built everything from nothing. Vito is a survivor, a tactician, but also a father who wants better for his children. His arc isn't about change, it's about legacy. He's not trying to grow. He's trying to hand off the empire he built and protect his family from self-destruction. And even though he tries to steer Michael away from the business, he ultimately sees that Michael is the only one capable of taking the mantle. Vito's tragedy is that he wanted peace, but created a world where peace was impossible. His character is the emotional anchor of the film, wise, weary, and quietly doomed. Then there's Sonny Corleone, fiery, passionate, and uncontrollable. Sonny is the eldest son, the obvious heir to Vito's throne. But Sonny leads with emotion, not strategy. He's all heart and fists, a man who can't walk away from a fight. His temper is his trademark, and it's also his fatal flaw. When his sister is abused by her husband, Sonny charges into danger without thinking. It's not just an impulsive act, it's pure, explosive rage. His murder at the toll booth is one of the film's most brutal scenes, and it's not just the violence that hits, it's the feeling of inevitability. Sonny was too wild for this world, too hot-headed to lead, and his death paves the way for Michael to step in with colder, more measured control. Sonny represents the old way, muscle over mind, and his downfall marks a turning point for the entire family. Tom Hagen, the family consigliere, is an island of calm in a sea of chaos. He's not Italian, not a blood Corleone, but he's been adopted into the family and serves as the legal and strategic advisor. Tom is intelligent, composed, and fiercely loyal, but he's also limited by his morality. He's a man who operates within reason in a world that increasingly demands ruthlessness. He tries to keep the family together with logic and diplomacy, but he's often sidelined when things get bloody. Tom's character is subtle but essential. He reflects what the family could be if it chose restraint over violence. He's the voice of reason, and watching him be slowly pushed to the margins as Michael rises is part of the film's quiet heartbreak. Kay Adams begins the film as an outsider, much like Michael. She's curious, perhaps even a little naive. She loves Michael, but she doesn't understand the world he comes from. At first, she believes she can pull him out, keep him separate from the family's darkness. But as Michael changes, Kay becomes the audience's window into the cost of his choices. Her confusion turns to fear, and fear turns to disbelief. By the end, when she asks Michael if he killed Carlo, and he lies to her face, it's the final break. She wants to believe him. She needs to. But then she watches as Michael is hailed as the new dawn, the door closing between them with terrifying finality. Kay's arc is one of disillusionment. She doesn't just lose the man she loved. She loses the version of reality she thought she could live with. Even the secondary characters have rich layers. Fredo, the overlooked brother, is meek and insecure, a character whose arc truly blooms in later films. But even here, you can sense the seeds of resentment and weakness. Clemenza and Tessio are more than just henchmen. They're old friends of the family, each representing a different approach to loyalty and survival. When Tessio betrays Michael in the end, it's done not with anger, but with quiet resignation. Even betrayal, in this world, feels like strategy, not emotion. Every relationship in the film adds more depth. Vito and Michael. Michael and Kay. Sonny and Tom. Even the Don's enemies are not one-note villains. They have motivations, fears, and personal codes. The brilliance of the character development lies in how no one is entirely good or evil. They're just human beings, shaped by a world that demands sacrifice. Power comes with a price. Love comes with risk. Loyalty comes with blood. In The Godfather, transformation is inevitable. The characters don't just evolve. They unravel. They calcify. They rot, or they rise. And the film captures every subtle shift with patience and precision. You don't just watch these characters change. You feel it. You live it. And by the time the door closes in that final shot, you realize that no one escaped unchanged. Not the family, not the lovers, not the audience. The performances in The Godfather aren't just essential to the story. They are the story. Without the level of depth, authenticity, and raw emotional power that the actors bring to each role, this film would never have become the towering cinematic masterpiece that it is. Every performance feels lived in. These aren't actors pretending to be mobsters or family members. They are these people. They inhabit them with such commitment and subtlety that you never question what you're watching. You feel like you're peering behind a curtain into a world that's real, dangerous, and heartbreakingly human. There's no single performance carrying the film. It's a constellation of perfectly cast and perfectly executed roles that orbit around each other, creating tension, tragedy, and unforgettable drama. Marlon Brando as Don Vito Corleone is more than iconic, he's mythic. Brando doesn't give a flashy performance, he gives a commanding one. He barely raises his voice, and yet the weight of his presence is enough to silence a room. From the moment we meet him, sitting in shadow, stroking a cat, speaking in that now legendary mumble, Brando sets the tone. He transforms himself physically, stooped posture, cotton in his cheeks, slow, deliberate gestures, but the true power lies in how much emotion he communicates through stillness. Don Vito is not a monster. He's a patriarch. He's feared, yes, but he's also deeply respected. He shows mercy. He believes in loyalty. He's a man with codes and boundaries in a world that's growing more ruthless by the day. Brando gives Vito a soul. He humanizes him without ever softening him. And when Vito dies, quietly in his garden while playing with his grandson, it's one of the most tender moments in a film full of blood and betrayal. That's the power of Brando's performance. He makes you mourn a mafia boss like he's your own father. Al Pacino, as Michael Corleone, delivers what might be the most meticulously calibrated performance of his career. His evolution from innocent war hero to cold, calculating mafia don doesn't happen in one dramatic scene. It happens slowly, silently, in his eyes, in his posture, in the pauses between his words. In the beginning, Pacino plays Michael with a quiet charm, almost boyish. He's the clean one, the one who's supposed to escape this life. But watch how that light slowly fades. After the attempt on his father's life, you can see a switch begin to flip. His performance becomes colder, more deliberate. He speaks less, but says more with his silence. The scene at the restaurant, where Michael murders Sollozzo and McCluskey, is a masterclass in tension. Pacino barely says a word, but his internal storm is visible in every flicker of hesitation, every tightening of the jaw. By the end of the film, when he lies to Kay with absolute composure and coldly assumes the role of Don, Pacino completes the transformation without ever needing to raise his voice. It's chilling, tragic, and utterly convincing. James Caan's portrayal of Sonny Corleone is the complete opposite in energy. Sonny is a firecracker, hot-headed, impulsive, and fiercely loyal. Caan fills him with raw, explosive energy. He swaggers through the film, yelling, laughing, punching, kissing. He's pure emotion, and it pours out of him in every scene. But Caan also lets you see Sonny's heart. He's the most outwardly loving of Vito's sons, and the most emotionally reactive. When he sees his sister Connie bruised and beaten, he doesn't think, he acts. That impulsiveness is what makes him dangerous and, ultimately, what gets him killed. But Caan makes you feel the loss of Sonny because he wasn't just the muscle of the family, he was its emotional core. His absence in the second half of the film creates a silence that no one can fill. Robert Duvall as Tom Hagen is the definition of understated excellence. Tom is not a Corleone by blood, but Duvall makes it clear that he's no outsider. He plays Tom with grace, poise, and deep emotional intelligence. He's calm under pressure, always thinking several steps ahead, and always speaking just enough to be heard without causing waves. Duvall gives Tom the feel of a man who knows his position is fragile, but who carries himself with quiet confidence. There's a subtle sadness in Tom, too, a sense that he knows he'll never fully be one of them, no matter how loyal he is. That tension, always simmering beneath the surface, makes his character feel real, relatable, and indispensable. Diane Keaton, as Kay Adams, has one of the most emotionally devastating roles in the film. She starts off bright-eyed, curious, slightly amused by the Corleone family's traditions. Keaton plays Kay with a light touch in the beginning, showing warmth and hope that maybe Michael is different. But as the story unfolds and Michael begins his descent, Keaton brings a mounting sense of dread to her performance. She's the only true outsider, the only character in the film who responds to the family's darkness with shock and horror rather than resignation. In the final scenes, when Kay asks Michael if he killed Carlo and he lies to her face, Keaton's reaction is gut-wrenching. Her eyes do all the work. When the door closes on her, you're not just watching the end of a scene, you're witnessing the collapse of trust, of love, of everything she thought she knew. Even in the smaller roles, the performances shine with character and purpose. Richard Castellano as Clemenza is both endearing and intimidating. He has that old-world charm, but he's deadly when he needs to be. He makes you believe that spaghetti sauce and murder can belong in the same conversation. Abe Vigada as Tessio is calm, almost invisible, until the moment he betrays Michael, and you see the cost of that decision etched into his face. John Cazale as Fredo doesn't get many lines in this film, but he radiates insecurity and longing. You already sense the cracks forming and the seeds of betrayal that will bloom in the sequels. And let's not forget Talia Shire as Connie, whose descent from joyful bride to broken, abused wife is heartbreakingly real. She captures rage, grief, and helplessness in such a raw, unfiltered way that her scenes feel like a punch to the gut. What makes these performances unforgettable isn't just the talent of the individual actors, it's how they work together. The chemistry between the cast is seamless. You believe their family. You believe in their shared history, their unspoken hierarchies, their love and resentments. The dinner table scenes feel like real dinners. The fights feel personal. The betrayals feel earned. There's an invisible thread that ties them all together, a lived-in realism that can't be faked. This cast doesn't just support the story. They elevate it, enrich it, and turn it into something transcendent. These performances aren't about theatrics or big emotional outbursts. They're about controlled intensity, layered expression, and deeply human moments. You don't just watch these characters, you feel them. You believe them. And when the story ends, they stay with you. Because in The Godfather, every performance is a portrait of power, loyalty, and loss, painted not with broad strokes, but with quiet devastation and absolute truth. Francis Ford Coppola's direction in The Godfather doesn't just shape the film, it builds it, brick by brick, with the precision of an architect and the intuition of a poet. He doesn't guide the audience by the hand. He immerses them, traps them in a world where tradition collides with treachery and where power is as seductive as it is corrosive. Coppola's genius lies in his control, not control as in dominance, but as in discipline. He resists the urge to exaggerate. He never shows more than is needed. And because of that restraint, every shot feels like a quiet explosion waiting to happen. From the first frame, he carves out an atmosphere that feels thick with secrets. The opening isn't flashy. It's a slow zoom out from a monologue, Bonacera's plea for justice. Not gunfire. Not action. Just a man in desperation, lit like a Rembrandt painting, whispering into darkness. Coppola doesn't jumpstart his film. He lowers you into it like sinking into a bath of warm smoke. He uses this moment to establish tone, hierarchy, and morality. While most crime films open with a bang, The Godfather opens with a favor. And that's exactly what this world runs on: favors, promises, silence, and consequence. Coppola's use of lighting alone could be studied for hours. The iconic low-light interiors, those dim amber glows, the heavy shadows across faces, it's all carefully orchestrated to convey more than dialogue ever could. There's a reason so many faces in this film seem half-lit. Coppola is constantly reminding us that no character is fully seen, fully known, or entirely good or evil. The visual mood is rich with ambiguity. The mise-en-scene feels theatrical, almost painterly, and yet never artificial. This is a world cloaked in darkness, where deals are whispered and justice is personal, and Coppola's camera never lets us forget that. He understands the power of patience. In an era where films were becoming faster and louder, Coppola slowed everything down. He lets conversations breathe. He lets tension build so gradually that by the time something erupts, it hits with terrifying force. Look at the scene where Michael shoots Sollozzo and McCluskey. It's a masterclass in pacing. The wait, the silence, the ticking clock of Michael's breath. Coppola draws the scene out until the audience is almost screaming inside, then lets it snap in an instant of brutal violence. That kind of emotional control requires trust in your material and your audience, and Coppola has both in abundance. Stylistically, he makes bold but elegant choices. The camera movements are never flashy for their own sake. A slow dolly, a lingering close-up, a tight frame that traps a character in their own decisions. Everything is done with purpose. When Michael sits in the chair once occupied by his father, the camera doesn't just observe, it sanctifies the moment. When Don Vito's body lies still in the orange grove, the camera doesn't mourn, it watches, quietly, as the story passes to the next generation. These are visual metaphors, not just pretty shots. Coppola treats the camera like a silent narrator, never shouting but always watching. Perhaps the greatest testament to Coppola's direction is how seamlessly he balances the intimate with the epic. This isn't just a story about a crime family, it's a story about a family. Fathers and sons, brothers and sisters, love and betrayal. He brings Shakespearean weight to what could have been a straightforward gangster tale. Every dinner conversation is layered with history. Every glance carries resentment, regret, or warning. Coppola never lets the violence overwhelm the humanity. If anything, he uses it to punctuate the emotional stakes. When Sonny is gunned down in a hail of bullets, it's not action, it's tragedy. When Michael orders Carlo's execution, it's not cruelty, it's inheritance. Coppola's direction makes sure you feel the price of every decision. He also has a masterful grip on the rhythm of the film. It flows like a symphony, alternating between quiet movements and explosive crescendos. He lets you settle into moments of calm, only to remind you how fragile that peace is. The wedding at the beginning is not just a joyful event. It's a place where business is done, allegiances are tested, futures are decided. The family dinner isn't just about food, it's a power map. And the church baptism at the end isn't just a ceremony, it's a bloodletting dressed as grace. Coppola crosscuts between Michael's child being baptized and his enemies being murdered in cold blood, and the contrast is breathtaking. It's not just stylish, it's storytelling at its most cinematic. In that sequence, Coppola captures the exact moment when Michael becomes something else entirely. And he does it without a single line of explanation. One of his most genius moves was understanding when to say no. No to unnecessary exposition. No to overacting. No to studio interference. He famously had to fight to keep Al Pacino and Marlon Brando. Coppola protects the story. He protects its silence. He protects its soul. And he allows the audience to enter that world fully, with no hand-holding. You either sink into the story or you don't, but he never panders, never simplifies, never rushes. And then there's the way he handles character perspective. Coppola never plays favorites. He doesn't vilify or glorify. He simply observes. He lets you sit with Michael as he transforms, lets you mourn Vito as he fades, lets you flinch as Sonny lashes out. You watch people make terrible decisions for reasons that make complete sense to them. That's the brilliance of his direction. He doesn't judge. He reveals. He lays the truth on the table and lets it sting. Coppola also understands the weight of legacy, both within the film and beyond it. He directs The Godfather like he knows it's going to last. Like he's not just making a movie, he's building a monument. But what makes his direction so powerful is that it never feels self-important. It feels personal, emotional, focused. He doesn't just craft images. He crafts moments that stay with you, that grow in your mind long after the credits roll. Everything in The Godfather, the tone, the tension, the performances, the pace, is filtered through Coppola's unwavering vision. He doesn't just tell a story. He creates a world that feels as real, as dangerous, and as seductive as the one we live in. It's a direction style that whispers rather than shouts, that simmers rather than boils over. And in doing so, Coppola makes every choice, every silence, every shadow feel deliberate, meaningful, and unforgettable. The cinematography of The Godfather isn't just something you watch, it's something you enter. From the moment the screen fades in and you see that impossibly dark frame, you're pulled into a world where light is rationed like secrets, and shadows aren't just a visual choice. They're the very language the film speaks in. Gordon Willis didn't merely shoot a gangster movie. He sculpted a visual myth. He crafted every frame like a master painter, choosing his palette not for realism, but for feeling, for symbolism, for silent emotional weight. The choices made with lighting, camera angles, movement, and framing don't decorate the film. They define it. They are what make The Godfather feel so quiet and so thunderous at the same time. Let's begin with what's most iconic, the shadows. Willis redefined how darkness could be used in film. Where many cinematographers might have been afraid of underexposing a scene, he leaned into it. He embraced murkiness. He turned low light into a storytelling weapon. Half the time, characters speak from within blackness, their faces cloaked, their eyes hidden, their emotions buried. Don Vito Corleone himself is often shown as a face floating in a sea of shadow, his features barely distinguishable except for a glint of eye or the shine on his cheek. This wasn't accidental. The darkness didn't obscure the characters, it revealed them. Their secrets, their double lives, their moral fog. In this world, seeing less actually means feeling more. That commitment to shadow is crucial to the film's emotional tone. You never feel safe, even in stillness. The dim interiors of the Corleone house, the closed-in study, the narrow hallways, these aren't places of warmth, even if the lighting is golden. These are spaces where people whisper life and death decisions. And Willis gives them that hushed, cathedral-like atmosphere with his lighting. Shadows stretch across walls like silent judges. People linger at the edges of frames. Faces vanish into dark corners as if the environment itself is swallowing them whole. There's no comfort in the light either. In this world, clarity only exposes danger. Now, consider how the film frames its characters. Willis often places them dead center, but rarely with comfort. They sit in rooms too large for them, surrounded by heavy furniture, looming drapery, or long, silent walls. The frame creates pressure, almost like it's pressing in on them. Characters are often boxed in by door frames, window slats, or partially obstructed by foreground elements. Michael, especially, is frequently isolated by space. He's surrounded by people, yet visually alone. As he ascends into power, the camera doesn't celebrate him. It distances him. He becomes more stoic, more still, more silent, and the framing mirrors that. He's not just leading the family, he's becoming trapped in it. Willis's camera movement is a lesson in restraint. It never calls attention to itself, never tries to impress you. Instead, it glides. It watches. It waits. In the opening wedding scene, the camera floats from one family member to another, allowing the characters to fill in the world themselves. No quick cuts. No sudden pans. Just a patient observation of people in their natural habitats, laughing, gossiping, scheming. The calmness of the movement gives a false sense of peace, making the darkness to come feel even heavier. When the camera does move purposefully, like the slow dolly toward Michael before the restaurant shooting, it tightens the vice of tension. You feel it in your chest. It's not about what the camera shows. It's about what the camera knows. The contrast between interior and exterior shots is also masterfully handled. Inside, everything is heavy, deep shadows, enclosed rooms, warm but oppressive tones. Then we cut to Sicily, and suddenly the world explodes with natural light. The sun is unforgiving, the landscapes wide and vast. But even here, Willis never lets us breathe completely. The brightness feels ancient, almost ominous. There's a quiet melancholy in the open fields, in the dusty roads, in the long, wordless walks through the hills. Michael may be in hiding, but visually he's more exposed than ever. Willis uses the wide-open Sicilian environment not for freedom, but for emotional distance. These aren't vacation shots. They're meditations. And when Apollonia dies, her body flung into sunlight as the car explodes, the starkness of the image shocks. The brightness suddenly becomes brutal. One of the most astonishing examples of cinematographic storytelling comes during the baptism sequence, a perfect collision of lighting, framing, and editing. Inside the church, the light is ethereal. High ceilings, candles, glowing altars. Everything is pure, holy, ceremonial. But as Michael utters vows of faith and protection, Willis intercuts with images of violent murder, each one darker, bloodier, colder. Here, the cinematography is doing double duty. It's exposing hypocrisy and delivering poetry. Michael stands in divine light as his soul darkens. Every shot contrast is a dagger. And as the murders unfold, they are shot with brutal clarity. The hits are fast, silent, and impersonal. This isn't chaos, it's orchestration. And visually, it feels like a sacred ritual being desecrated in real time. Then there are the quiet visual motifs that reappear like ghosts throughout the film. The way oranges appear just before moments of death. The way doors are used to separate and isolate. The way windows cast long horizontal shadows, slicing across characters like unspoken threats. None of it is random. Willis and Coppola treat the camera like an omniscient narrator, always hinting, always suggesting, but never fully revealing. You don't get answers in this film. you get moods.
Dread.
Tension. Elegance.
Grief.
The cinematography makes you sit in those feelings, letting them marinate with each carefully crafted frame. Even the use of focus is precise and meaningful. In conversations, the background often falls into soft blur, allowing your eye to rest solely on the characters. But occasionally, Willis lets someone linger in the background, in focus but silent. Watching. Waiting. The thread is never overt, but it's always present. You feel like the camera knows more than the characters do. That's not just style. That's power. The lens isn't just capturing a scene, it's telling you what matters. What to feel. What to fear. Color, too, is wielded with purpose. The palette is restrained, sepias, browns, dark reds, blacks. There's very little blue or white or brightness. This isn't the real world. It's the memory of a world. The color choices lend a timeless, sepia-tone quality that makes everything feel like legend rather than history. It's not trying to feel modern, it's trying to feel immortal, and it succeeds. In The Godfather, cinematography isn't just supporting the narrative, it is the narrative. It sets the moral fog. It deepens the characters. It traps you in their world and refuses to let you out until the last shadow has passed. Gordon Willis doesn't just light scenes, he paints them with secrecy. He doesn't just move the camera, he sculpts the air around the characters. Every moment is measured. Every shadow is placed. Every silence is lit. It's not flashy. It's not loud. But it's unforgettable. And it's why this film doesn't just look great. It feels like a world you'll never fully escape. The editing and pacing of The Godfather are nothing short of masterful, the cinematic equivalent of a slow-burning fuse that hisses with quiet promise before finally exploding in operatic brilliance. This film doesn't move fast, but it moves with purpose. It doesn't rely on flashy cuts or rapid montage. Instead, it invites you into its world with a confident hand, guiding you at a deliberate pace that allows the weight of every glance, every pause, every silence to land with full impact. And that's exactly why it's so powerful. The film doesn't force emotion. It lets it grow slowly and naturally until it takes root. Editor William Reynolds, along with Peter Zinner, doesn't treat scenes as isolated beats to be stitched together. They treat the narrative like an unfolding myth. The editing has the patience of a storyteller by a fire, someone who knows the end is devastating, but takes their time getting there because the journey must be savored. Every transition is smooth and intentional, giving the audience room to breathe between moments of conflict, betrayal, intimacy, and tragedy. And because the pacing never rushes, it gives you time to sit with the tension. You don't just witness Michael's transformation, you feel the long, inevitable road that takes him from reluctant son to ruthless Don. The film opens not with spectacle, but with intimacy. One man, Bonacera, pleads his case to Don Vito Corleone in a dark, quiet room. The editing here does something remarkable. It doesn't move. It stays. It lingers. The camera slowly zooms out, as if reluctant to reveal the full scene, and the cuts are minimal. You are asked to sit in the discomfort, to understand that power in this world doesn't need to shout, it whispers. And that whisper is stronger than a scream. That very first editorial decision, asterisk not asterisk to cut away too quickly, sets the emotional tempo for the entire film. The editors are telling you, this will not be a film of haste. This is a world where things take time, where nothing happens without consequence, and where every choice carries weight. As the story unfolds, you begin to notice how the rhythm of the editing changes based on the emotional stakes of each moment. Conversations aren't just scenes to relay information. They're woven with tension, with unspoken threats and silent calculations. The film allows those conversations to stretch. Look at the scene where Michael meets with Sollozzo and McCluskey. The pacing is like a held breath. The walk to the restroom, the long silence, the subtle glances, the return to the table. It's all quiet, restrained, and excruciatingly tense. The editing doesn't try to build suspense with music or jump cuts. It builds it with stillness. By not cutting unnecessarily, The tension builds until you can barely sit still. Then, when the shot is fired, it's a shock, not just because of the violence, but because of how long you waited for it. This careful rhythm continues throughout the film. Family dinners, office negotiations, whisper discussions in shadowed rooms. The scenes often play out in what feels like real time. And that's intentional. The editors resist the urge to trim or shorten for convenience. Instead, they preserve the cadence of real human interaction, full of pauses, of silences heavy with meaning, of thoughts unspoken. That sense of realism heightens the emotional impact. When Sonny explodes in rage, when Michael sits in the dark with Vito, when Kay begins to realize who Michael is becoming, these moments hit hard not because they're quick, but because they're allowed to breathe. One of the most famous editorial choices in film history comes during the baptism sequence. This isn't just good editing, it's revolutionary storytelling. The parallel cutting between the peaceful, holy ritual of the baptism and the brutal, cold murders of the Corleone enemies isn't just clever, it's thematically thunderous. As Michael renounces Satan and promises to guide his godson in a righteous life, we watch assassins carry out his bloody commands. The rhythm of the cuts gets tighter and tighter, the contrast starker and starker, until the tension is unbearable. By the end of the sequence, Michael has completely become the Godfather, not just in name, but in action. And the editing makes that transformation unavoidable. You don't just see the contradiction, you feel it deep in your gut. Even in its transitions, the editing is thoughtful. The move from New York to Sicily is not abrupt. The film lets you feel the difference in air, in silence, in pacing. Sicily is wide, sunlit, and distant, almost like a dream. The pacing slows down even more, matching the rhythm of the land, the language, and Michael's retreat into himself. But even here, the editing never loses its thread. It's as if the film is saying, this story may look like it's wandering, but everything is connected. And sure enough, when the tragedy of Apollonia's death brings Michael back, the rhythm tightens again. The softness vanishes. The cold sharpness of the American scenes returns. The editors make sure that shift in tone isn't just heard or seen, it's felt. As the film builds toward its conclusion, the tempo increases, not in a frantic way, but with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Every scene in the final act flows with a sense of inevitability. Michael's decision-making becomes quicker, the dialogue more clipped, the camera more focused. The editing mirrors this internal transformation. The cuts become more decisive, the scenes more economical. The Corleone family isn't waiting anymore, they're executing. Michael's world has shifted from waiting to ruling, and the film's pacing adapts accordingly. And then, finally, that last scene. The door closing on Kay's face. One simple motion. One quiet cut. One image that encapsulates the entire film. That door shutting is a metaphor. A punctuation. And the editors knew exactly how long to hold it. Not too fast. Not too long. Just enough to let you feel the finality. That's the power of editing at its finest, knowing that sometimes the most powerful cut is the quietest one. The pacing and editing of The Godfather are not there to entertain in the modern sense. They are there to absorb you, to wrap you in a world so thick with tension, loyalty, betrayal, and consequence that you forget you're watching a movie at all. Every decision is calculated. Every scene is allowed to develop, not under pressure, but under purpose. It's not just about telling a story, it's about giving you time to live inside it. And by the end, the rhythm of the film doesn't just stay with you, it becomes part of you, echoing like footsteps in a marble hallway long after the final cut. The soundtrack and score of The Godfather are like a silent character, always present, always watching, always deepening the emotion of every scene without ever needing to speak. Nino Rota's compositions don't just support the narrative, they shape it. They give voice to the unsaid, they linger long after the dialogue ends, and they echo through the corridors of memory and morality. This isn't music designed to stand out in a loud, cinematic way. It's music built to settle deep in your bones, to remind you, softly and ominously, that in this world, power doesn't shout. It whispers in a minor key. Let's start with the main theme, the iconic Godfather waltz. It's not loud. It doesn't scream for attention, but it seeps in from the first time you hear it. A slow, aching melody, written in a mournful tone that instantly tells you this story isn't about glamour or glory. It's about legacy. It's about loss. It's about the cost of silence, the burden of blood, and the slow erosion of one man's soul. That theme becomes the musical spine of the entire film, returning in different forms and variations, depending on what the scene needs emotionally. When it plays as a solo trumpet line, it feels intimate and tragic. When it swells with strings, it feels operatic and inevitable. And when it's absent, its silence is deafening. Rhoda is a composer who knows that the power of a theme doesn't come from how many times you hear it, but how you hear it. He reshapes that main melody like a sculptor carving from the same block of marble, sometimes polishing it into something warm and nostalgic, other times letting it crumble into fragments of dread. It is a musical motif that follows Michael Corleone like a shadow. At first, it hovers in the background while Vito rules, and Michael tries to remain distant. But the further Michael falls into the world of the family business, the louder and more dominant that theme becomes. By the end, it doesn't play for Don Vito anymore. It plays for Michael. The theme has changed hands, just like the family empire has. But The Godfather isn't all about one melody. The score is filled with subtle cues and textures that capture the dual nature of its characters and settings. During the wedding scene at the beginning, we hear lively Italian folk music, traditional and cheerful, full of community and family pride. It's festive, even joyful, but it's not innocent. Rhoda and director Francis Ford Coppola use that joyful music to mask the tension inside the Don's office. Outside, the party rages on with accordion melodies and laughter. Inside, the real business of the family begins. Quiet threats, power plays, oaths of loyalty. This contrast isn't accidental. The music plays like a mask, smiling while something darker brews underneath. And it teaches the viewer right away, in this world, appearances are never the full truth. And then we reach the Sicily chapter of the film. The music takes a turn, not just geographically, but emotionally. The score becomes softer, more acoustic, infused with traditional instruments and folk-like motifs that feel ancient and sun-washed. It's romantic, yes, but also ghostly. Michael walks through the hills with Apollonia, and the music plays like a dream, a world untouched by violence, at least on the surface. But even in those moments of beauty, there's a gentle sadness in the score. You feel like the music already knows how this story ends. It's a love theme drenched in mourning. The melodies are wistful, never fully joyous. Rhoda scores those scenes not as a love story, but as a pause in a tragedy, a moment of light before the darkness resumes. That emotional intelligence is what sets the score apart. Rhoda doesn't force your feelings. He guides them. He knows when to stay quiet. Some of the film's most powerful scenes are nearly or completely silent. The hospital scene, where Michael protects his father, is filled not with swelling music, but with stillness. The tension is built through footsteps, hushed whispers, the distant sound of approaching danger. There's no musical cue yelling danger. Instead, the music withholds itself, making the silence feel heavier. That restraint makes you lean in. It makes you uneasy. It works because the score knows when to step back. And then, of course, there's the baptism scene, arguably one of the most iconic sequences in film history. As Michael stands at the altar, renouncing Satan and promising to guide his godchild in the Catholic faith, we cut to scenes of murder, assassins carrying out his orders, cold and efficient. The music during this sequence is religious, choral, full of sacred intensity. But it's not celebratory. It's grim. It creates a solemnity that clashes perfectly with the brutality on screen. The music doesn't moralize, it simply watches, just like the camera. And the contrast between sound and image makes the moment unforgettable. It turns Michael's actions into a dark ritual, a baptism not just of water, but of blood. Without Rhoda's score, that scene would still be powerful, but with it, it becomes transcendent. Another fascinating thing about the score is how timeless it feels. It's deeply rooted in Italian tradition, yes, but it never sounds dated or cliché. Rhoda fuses classical elements with folk influences and gives it a cinematic polish that makes it feel larger than life. The result is music that feels mythic, like it belongs to a story that's been told 1,000 times before and will be told 1,000 times again. That's why even people who haven't seen the film recognize the music. It lives in the cultural memory. It's mournful, noble, and utterly unforgettable. But perhaps the most brilliant thing Rhoda does is let the music disappear when it needs to. He doesn't fill the film wall-to-wall with sound. Instead, he uses the score sparingly, allowing the moments of violence, grief, or moral collapse to stand on their own. And because the score isn't constant, its presence means something. When the music returns, you feel it like a shiver. When it fades out, you feel the silence like a judgment. It's a score that respects the story. It elevates without dominating. It complements without competing. In a film so steeped in subtlety and control, the music is its perfect partner. It doesn't scream emotion. It conjures it. It doesn't dictate what to feel. It opens the door and lets you walk through. And long after the credits roll, when the final notes have faded, you'll still hear that waltz echoing in your head. Not because it was catchy, but because it knew the soul of the story. It heard the tragedy coming before anyone else did. And it sang it to us, softly, with the voice of fate. The deeper themes and messages in The Godfather are so richly woven into every line, gesture, and shot that they don't feel like traditional themes at all. They feel like truths the film quietly dares you to absorb. On the surface, yes, it's a gripping story about the rise of a crime family. But underneath, it's an epic meditation on the paradoxes of power, the corruption of idealism, the destruction caused by love and loyalty when weaponized, and the terrifying cost of transformation. It isn't just a film about the Mafia. It's a film about America, its promises, its hypocrisies, its hunger for power and respect, and it's also a tragedy about what happens when someone believes they can outmaneuver fate. Start with the theme of power and its price. Vito Corleone represents old-world power, patient, earned, commanding without needing to shout. His influence comes from years of favors and respect, not brute force. But even this gentler form of power is founded on intimidation and fear. Vito is not a violent man, but he surrounds himself with violence. He believes in rules, his own code, and for a time it works. But The Godfather slowly reveals that any form of power built on fear is always unstable. Vito's world can't survive forever because even the most dignified version of crime is still crime. Eventually, someone younger, more reckless, more ruthless is going to rise up and destroy the illusion of balance. Vito built a kingdom on whispered threats and careful diplomacy, but the ground underneath it is soaked in blood. And blood, in this world, is never forgotten. This bleeds directly into the most devastating arc of the film, Michael's transformation. The entire film is built around one central theme: how good intentions die in the name of duty. Michael doesn't want to become like his father. That's made clear from the start. He sits apart at the wedding, wearing a military uniform, telling Kay, "That's my family, Kay. It's not me." That line is the heartbeat of the entire movie, because slowly, scene by scene, we watch that distinction vanish. First, he steps in to protect his father. Then he kills for him. Then he flees, then returns, and finally assumes the throne. But the brilliance of the film is that it never paints this as a descent into madness. It's methodical, reasonable, even noble in its logic. Michael tells himself he's doing it to protect his father, to save his family. But every decision carves a piece off his soul. And by the end, there's nothing left but silence, command, and a door closing in the face of the last person who saw his humanity. That ending is not just iconic, it's deeply symbolic. The closed door is the ultimate visual metaphor for moral isolation. Michael has achieved everything his father built: status, control, loyalty, but he's lost everything his father tried to preserve: family, connection, peace. This theme of moral decay is handled with such subtlety that you almost don't notice the transformation happening. And that's the point. Evil doesn't arrive wearing horns. It slips in quietly, justified by love and duty, cloaked in honor. The Godfather is about how someone becomes a monster not because they want to but because they believe they have to. The film also offers a fascinating commentary on the American dream. On paper, the Corleones are the ultimate success story. Immigrants who built an empire, gained wealth, influence, and power. But what Coppola is really doing is exposing the rot underneath that fantasy. Vito's version of the American dream involves building his own rules because the system never treated his people fairly. Michael's version is darker. He becomes the system, playing it better than the people who designed it. And yet, in both cases, that dream comes with an unspoken truth. The higher you climb, the more you lose. You gain control, but you lose your soul. You achieve everything, but you trust no one. The Godfather doesn't condemn the American dream. It mourns it. It shows you the cost of chasing it when the world offers no honest path to success. Another theme that pulses throughout the film is tradition versus change. Vito represents a world of handshakes, long memories, and blood oaths. Michael represents a new order, colder, more efficient, more transactional. The old ways die quietly throughout the film. Vito tries to teach his son patience. He urges peace with rival families. He speaks with softness even when issuing warnings. But Michael's world doesn't have time for patience. The new America moves fast, and it doesn't respect old codes. So Michael adapts. He cuts faster, strikes harder, and doesn't flinch. The tragedy here isn't just that the old ways die, it's that they die with dignity, while the new ways rise without it. And the film doesn't take a clear stance on which is better. It simply shows that the world is changing, and even the strongest men are powerless to stop it. There's also a persistent theme of loyalty and betrayal. In this world, loyalty is currency, and betrayal is an unforgivable sin. Every character is weighed by where their loyalties lie. Tom Hagen, Sonny, Fredo, Tessio, Clemenza. You see how the family values loyalty above all else. But what the film reveals, slowly and painfully, is that loyalty can be a trap. People remain loyal not because they believe in the cause, but because they're afraid to do anything else. And when betrayal comes, it is swift and final. The moment Tessio turns, you feel the heartbreak, not because he's evil, but because he's tired, practical, and knows the game is over. That's what makes betrayal in The Godfather so devastating. It's not done out of malice, it's done out of necessity. And that makes it more human, more tragic. The role of masculinity and emotional repression also quietly hums beneath the surface. The men in this film don't cry. They don't show weakness. Emotions are private, buried, or weaponized. Vito cries only once, when he sees his son in the hospital. Michael becomes more emotionally shut down with every scene. Sonny is the only one who lets his emotions run wild, and he dies brutally because of it. The film critiques this quiet stoicism, not directly, but by showing the emotional wreckage it leaves behind. The women in this film are sidelined, but their silence is deafening. Kay's final gaze, Connie's grief. These are emotional truths the men in this story refuse to confront. And their refusal costs them everything. Even religion plays a deeply ironic role. Baptisms, weddings, funerals, sacred moments are constantly juxtaposed with sin and murder. The film doesn't mock religion, but it does expose how easily sacred rituals are used as shields. Michael's baptism scene is the perfect example. He becomes godfather to a child while orchestrating a series of assassinations. It's not a contradiction, it's a statement. In this world, morality is flexible, and appearances matter more than truth. God may be present in ceremony, but he is absent in action. And perhaps the most enduring theme of all is the weight of legacy. Vito builds his empire not for himself, but for his children. He wants them to inherit security, respect, a name that opens doors. But he never questions what that name will demand from them in return. Michael inherits the throne, but with it comes a curse. He doesn't become Don to gain power. He becomes Don because he believes it's the only way to protect what remains. And in doing so, he ensures the very destruction he was trying to prevent. When it comes to visual effects, The Godfather doesn't operate in the same cinematic universe as modern blockbusters filled with CGI creatures, sky-high explosions, and green screen battles. Instead, this is a film rooted in realism, subtlety, and immersion, where every visual effect is practical, handcrafted, and integrated so seamlessly that you don't notice you're watching effects at all. That's the genius of it. Rather than overwhelm the viewer with artificial flourishes, The Godfather pulls you in with understated precision. The effects aren't meant to impress, they're meant to disappear. And when they do, you believe in the world so deeply that it stops feeling like fiction altogether. Let's talk about practical effects, because The Godfather is a masterclass in how to use them without ever drawing attention. This is a film where violence doesn't feel operatic or stylized. It feels intimate, messy, sudden. And that's because the effects are all done on set, in real time, using physical props, old-school techniques, and an extraordinary attention to realism. Take Sonny's iconic death at the toll booth. Dozens of squibs, tiny, timed explosive packets, were rigged across James Caan's body. They had one chance to shoot that sequence correctly because resetting all of those squibs would have taken hours. And yet, the result is so brutal and believable that it remains one of the most unforgettable death scenes in cinema. His body jerks and spasms in real time, his movements ragged and uncontrolled. There's no CGI to smooth it out, no artificial spray of digital blood. You feel every shot as if you're there. And it hits harder precisely because it isn't polished. It's terrifyingly real. The same goes for the car bomb that kills Apollonia. There's no digital detonation. What you see is what actually happened, an actual explosion, perfectly timed, filmed from the right angle to maximize impact without any flashy aftereffects. It doesn't look like a visual effect. It looks like a moment caught on camera that wasn't supposed to happen. That's the power of in-camera execution. It doesn't ask the audience to suspend disbelief. It removes the need for disbelief altogether. You buy into the moment without even realizing you're being sold anything. Even in quieter scenes, the visual effects, or more accurately, the visual craftsmanship, create atmosphere through texture rather than spectacle. There's an almost hypnotic quality to the way the lighting interacts with the set design. The smoke curling through the slats of a window, the soft golden glow of a desk lamp, the way faces are half-lit in Don Corleone's office, shrouded in shadow and mystery. None of this is accidental. These are choices made with the same level of detail as the makeup or costuming. And they're achieved not with digital tools, but with gels on lights, fog machines, and clever cinematography. It's visual magic done the hard way, and it works. In a sense, The Godfather's visual effects are its restraint. Its refusal to embellish for the sake of entertainment. The film never tries to dramatize death or violence through exaggerated visuals. When something brutal happens, like Luca Brasi's strangulation or Mo Green's execution, it happens in a way that feels disturbingly grounded. A hand wrapped in piano wire, a silenced pistol behind a pair of glasses. There's no flashy choreography, no acrobatic moves, no blood splashing in slow motion. And yet, these moments are etched into the collective memory of cinema more vividly than any CGI-driven action sequence.
Why?
Because they're shot to feel inevitable, not theatrical. The contrast between what is shown and what is implied is also a brilliant use of visual storytelling. Coppola understands that what you don't see can be more powerful than what you do. He often cuts away just before a violent act or holds a shot just after, letting sound and reaction carry the weight. These are editing decisions, yes, but they also function as visual effects in their own right. They're psychological effects. They create space for the audience's imagination to fill in the blanks, which often results in a more emotionally potent experience than if everything were shown in graphic detail. One of the most unique aspects of the film's practical visual world is how it handles time and place. The story spans multiple years and locations, New York, Los Angeles, Sicily, yet it all feels unified, thanks to set design, costumes, and the authentic texture of the environments. The streets look like they belong in the 1940s. The cars, buildings, storefronts, all period accurate. These details are physical. They were built, painted, placed. There's no post-production gloss or digital recreation. The old-world charm of Sicily doesn't come from filters or CGI skies. It comes from shooting on real landscapes, with real lighting and capturing the grit and dust of the location. The result? A film that feels like history, not because it tells you it's the past, but because it shows you without gimmicks. Makeup and prosthetic work also qualify as practical effects, and they shine here. Don Vito's jaw, puffed slightly forward after his assassination attempt, is enhanced with subtle prosthetics. Marlon Brando famously stuffed his cheeks with cotton during the audition and later used a dental prosthetic to give Vito his iconic bulldog face. It's a physical transformation that looks completely natural, grounded, and expressive. It doesn't distract, it defines the character. There's a poetic irony in the fact that The Godfather, a film without a single pixel of CGI, looks and feels more real than many modern productions that spend millions on visual effects. It's because every shadow, every drop of blood, every flicker of firelight is part of the physical space the characters inhabit. The sets aren't blue-screen illusions, they're tactile environments. The costumes aren't digitally altered, they're hand-stitched. And the violence isn't stylized, it's ugly, shocking, and brief, as it often is in real life. In short, The Godfather's visual effects are a triumph not of technology, but of trust. Trust in the camera, trust in materials, trust in the craft of cinema. There's nothing flashy about it. No supernatural beings. No morphing animations. But every frame is an effect. One that affects you not by showing you something fantastic, but by making everything feel real. That's the kind of visual power that never goes out of style. It's the kind that doesn't age. It's the kind that reminds you that sometimes the most powerful special effect in a film is simply believing what you see. Set design and location work in The Godfather isn't just impressive, it's practically myth-making. This isn't a film that uses its sets as pretty backdrops or aesthetic dressing. These locations are storytelling tools, silent characters that say everything without speaking. Every wall, window, hallway, doorway, chair, and dim chandelier is deliberately chosen to carry weight. The spaces in The Godfather are drenched in meaning, mood, and metaphor. The film doesn't just happen in these places. It's shaped, haunted, and driven by them. Let's begin with the Corleone estate, because this isn't just where the story starts, it's where the entire world of the Corleone family is established. That sprawling Long Island compound is both fortress and sanctuary. There's the cheerful chaos of Connie's wedding outside, filled with music, relatives, and tradition, while inside, the Don's office is a dimly lit world of whispered deals and cold authority. The set design contrasts life and death, light and shadow, family and business. The wedding scenes take place in a backyard bursting with floral arrangements, picnic tables, wine barrels, and accordion music. It's colorful, loud, celebratory, and crowded with generations. But you step inside the office, and it's a different planet. Muted earth tones, wood-paneled walls, heavy drapes, Venetian blinds letting in narrow slats of light. It's not just about making the office look powerful, it's about creating the feeling that this room is where destinies are shaped and sealed. The props reinforce the Don's authority without a single word. The desk, the old photos, the cut crystal decanter, every object is a reminder of tradition, permanence, and controlled power. Then there's the broader environment of post-war New York City. It's never painted as glamorous. In fact, the streets are often grimy, gritty, even a little bleak. The sidewalks are cracked. Storefronts are worn. Tenements loom in the background. But that realism is by design. These neighborhoods look like they've been through things. The set dressings here, store signs, garbage cans, butcher shops, flickering neon lights, create an atmosphere that feels alive and untouchable by time. When Michael takes a walk with Kay or Sonny chases down Carlo in the street, you're not thinking about whether these places look accurate. You just know they are. The worn-down bars and smoky restaurants are filled with tiny details, framed pictures, scratched-up counters, dusty bottles on the shelves. These are not sets made to impress, they're sets built to exist. The hospital sequence, where Michael protects his wounded father, is another brilliant example of location used for tension. The eerily empty hallways, the echo of distant footsteps, the low lights, all of it turns an ordinary hospital into a place of danger and quiet dread. And the way the space is used heightens the stakes. You're never quite sure who's going to come around a corner or from behind a curtain. The hospital feels vast and yet suffocating, deserted, and yet full of unseen threats. That contrast is a masterstroke in production design. It takes a real-world location and twists it emotionally without any artificial tricks. And then there's Sicily. When the story shifts there, the entire visual language changes. Gone are the structured interiors and cold New York streets. Sicily is warm, rough, open, and ancient. The stone villages, sun-drenched hills, olive groves, and crumbling ruins transport the viewer to a slower, more timeless world. The Corleone family's homeland isn't presented as a tourist fantasy. It's raw and real. The buildings are simple, practical, almost monastic in their austerity. The clotheslines, the farm animals, the old wooden doors, they create a backdrop that speaks of survival, tradition, and bloodlines that run deeper than memory. The wedding between Michael and Apollonia doesn't look extravagant. It looks tribal, sacred, and filled with centuries-old customs. And when Apollonia dies, the blast that levels the car is made all the more horrifying because of the rural innocence of the surroundings. That peaceful landscape becomes a stage for unbearable loss. And it's all made possible because the location feels real, because it is. Let's not forget the interiors of Las Vegas later in the film. They're sleek, soulless, modern, and completely out of sync with everything the Corleones built back east. The casinos and hotel rooms have a polished veneer, but no character. The walls are clean, the lights are bright, the chairs are plush, but it's a world without roots. This contrast is intentional. Vegas represents the future of organized crime, profit-driven, flashy, corporate. Michael's discomfort in those settings is reflected by the sterile design. It's a world of surface with nothing underneath. Unlike the warmth and gravitas of the family's home, Las Vegas looks more like a trap, a place where tradition goes to die. Another genius move in the set design is how it reflects generational shifts. Vito's world is filled with dark wood, old books, aging portraits, heavy fabrics, a space shaped by years of slow accumulation. Michael's world becomes colder, sleeker, more calculated. The spaces around him gradually become less decorated and more minimal. It's as if, as he loses his humanity, the world around him does too. Even the Corleone compound feels emptier by the end, like the soul has been drained out of it. The film also excels at using props and set dressing as subtle storytelling tools. The oranges scattered through certain scenes, a symbol many associate with death in this film, are placed casually, not highlighted, but always there like omens. The religious iconography, the dusty wine cellars, the aging family photos, all of them deepen the mythology of the family without saying a word. You feel the burden of legacy in these spaces. You feel the ghosts. It's not the furniture itself, it's what the furniture means. Even the finale, the scene where Michael becomes the true Don, is a masterclass in spatial symbolism. The room is dimly lit, filled with loyal men who kiss his hand and call him Don Corleone. The set is cloaked in tradition. The camera pulls back slowly to the sound of the door closing, with Kay left standing outside in the cold, in the light. The warmth and darkness of the room contrast sharply with her world. It's not just a dramatic moment, it's a spatial statement. One world is closing around Michael, the other is shutting him out. And the set makes that emotional truth physical. Ultimately, The Godfather's set design and locations work not just because they're realistic, but because they are symbolic. They speak through architecture, texture, light, and shadow. They build a world where every table, curtain, vase, and doorway is doing narrative heavy lifting. You don't just see the spaces, you feel what they mean. That's not just good design. That's visual storytelling operating at the highest level. The locations aren't backgrounds. They are the history, psychology, and soul of the film itself. The dialogue and script in The Godfather aren't just tools for telling the story. They are the story's spine, its heart, its myth-making engine. Every line feels like it's dipped in tradition, wrapped in tension, and spoken as though the character's entire future depends on how carefully they say it. This is a film where people rarely say what they mean, but you always know what they mean. And that's the brilliance of the writing. The script doesn't just present conversations. It builds worlds, defines legacies, and sets the rules of an empire built on silence, loyalty, and careful wording. Right from the first scene, you're pulled into a universe where language is power. I believe in America. Those are the first words spoken. Not by a gangster, not by a hitman, but by a desperate undertaker pleading for justice in the one place he knows he might actually find it, Don Corleone's office. It's a quiet moment, but it's thunderous in impact. This line introduces not just the story, but the entire worldview of the film. America promised him justice and failed. So now he turns to the old world. That one line, so simple and softly spoken, encapsulates the entire theme of disillusionment with modern systems and the rise of a shadow system to replace them. That's how much weight the script carries in just a few words. Throughout the film, dialogue doesn't just sound good, it sounds right. It fits each character's background, personality, and purpose like a tailored suit. Don Vito Corleone's speech, for instance, is measured, slow, thoughtful. You can practically hear the weight of his history in every pause. He's never rushed, never emotional, always speaking with the calm of a man who doesn't need to prove anything. His words aren't commands, they're philosophies. A man who doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man. It's not just fatherly advice, it's a moral code. And when he says, "Revenge is a dish best served cold," you don't doubt for a second that he lives by that rule. His every phrase feels ancient, like it was passed down through centuries. Then there's Michael. His evolution is one of the great character arcs in cinematic history, and the script charts it with terrifying precision. In the early scenes, he's soft-spoken, respectful, reluctant. He tells Kay, "That's my family, Kay. It's not me." That line, that one quiet reassurance, becomes the lie that defines the rest of the film. As Michael is drawn into the family business, his words become sharper, colder, more authoritative. He stops asking. He starts declaring. By the time he tells Carlo, "Only don't tell me you're innocent, because it insults my intelligence," you know the transformation is complete. That's not Michael the outsider speaking. That's the new Don. Firm, calculating, and dangerous with just his tone. And of course, there's the dialogue everyone knows. The immortal lines that left the script and entered popular culture. "I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse." That line doesn't just stand out because it's catchy. It's chilling in how calm it is. It shows how the family's power works, not through screaming threats, but through inevitability. It's polite menace. It's business-like intimidation. It's the most famous thread in film history, and it never even raises its voice. The brilliance here is how the dialogue invites you to lean in, to listen closely, because power in this world doesn't yell, it whispers. Other iconic lines are scattered like gems throughout the film. "Leave the gun. Take the cannoli." It's delivered in such a casual, matter-of-fact tone that it's easy to miss how deeply it represents the strange blend of family tradition and ruthless violence at the heart of the Mafia. One moment they're committing cold-blooded murder, the next they're worried about bringing dessert home to their wife. That's not just wit, that's character revelation done in a single breath. The line is funny, yes, but it's also terrifying, because it shows how normalized the violence has become. Sonny's dialogue, on the other hand, is raw and hot-headed. He's impulsive, emotional, and loud, and his language reflects that in every scene. He interrupts, curses, yells. When he hears about the attack on his father, he explodes with, "They hit Pop. They shot him 5 times." He can't contain himself, and the script lets his language unravel with his emotions. That contrast between Sonny's volcanic outbursts and Vito's icy control isn't just acting, it's writing at work, showing us who these men are through how they speak. Tom Hagen's language is professional, neutral, measured. He's the bridge between the family's violent roots and their ambition for legitimacy. His calm delivery is essential. He's the one who speaks to outsiders, who smooths things over, who presents the business as just that, business. But even Tom has lines that carry weight. When he tells a Hollywood producer, Mr. Corleone is a man who insists on hearing bad news immediately, it's not just an observation, it's a warning. The subtle layering in the script makes even mundane statements feel like loaded weapons. And then there's Fredo. His dialogue is full of longing, frustration, and insecurity. He tries to speak with confidence, but there's always a tremble behind it. His infamous line in Part 2, "I'm smart." Not like everybody says, like dumb. "I'm smart and I want respect," becomes so heartbreaking because it's been built up through a dozen smaller, quieter failures in The Godfather. The seeds of that explosion are planted in the first film, in the way he talks, the way others talk over him, the way his words never quite land the way he wants them to. But what makes the script so powerful isn't just the big lines. It's the quiet ones, the pauses, the looks, the unsaid. The Godfather doesn't rely on exposition dumps or forced monologues. It trusts the audience to pick up on subtlety. When Kay asks Michael if it's true that he ordered the murder of Connie's husband, and he calmly says no, then closes the door on her, that's dialogue doing emotional violence. It's a single word, no, followed by a visual punch. But that word carries years of betrayal, heartbreak, and transformation. The script knew it didn't need a speech. It needed truth, and sometimes the most devastating truths are told in lies. This is a script where characters say one thing and mean another, where power is disguised as politeness, where loyalty is coded in euphemisms, where family and business blur so tightly that a wedding toast can double as a veiled threat. The dialogue is soaked in tradition, contradiction, ritual, and danger. It's memorable not because it's flashy, but because it feels inevitable, like every word spoken is part of something older, larger, and more permanent than the people saying it. In the end, The Godfather's script is a study in restraint, richness, and rhythm. It doesn't talk too much. It talks exactly enough. And when it speaks, the world listens, because what's being said has the weight of empire behind it. This isn't just memorable dialogue. It's the kind of writing that shapes the way we think about power, loyalty, betrayal, and silence. And in a film where everything is dangerous, every word becomes a weapon. The Godfather doesn't just function within the crime genre, it reigns over it. Long before it became a blueprint for modern mafia storytelling, it was something of a cinematic rebellion. It took a genre that had often been painted in bold, broad strokes, fast-talking gangsters, flashy violence, hard-boiled detectives, and infused it with sophistication, gravity, and operatic elegance. What emerged wasn't just a gangster movie. It was a sprawling family epic, a tragedy steeped in ritual, silence, and the slow burn of power. What sets it apart immediately is how it approaches the expectations of the genre. In most crime films, you're brought into the action early, heists, shootouts, betrayals, deals gone wrong. But The Godfather opens with a quiet, dimly lit conversation. No guns. No car chases. Just a plea. A man asking for justice, not from the state, but from someone more powerful. This scene is not just an atmospheric table setter. It's a statement of intent. It says, this is not that kind of crime film. This is about respect, negotiation, power beneath the surface. You've entered a world where violence is always looming but rarely shown unless necessary, and when it arrives, it lands with shattering force. The film understands genre expectations but dares to move slower, speak softer, and feel deeper. And that gamble pays off. The tension doesn't come from kinetic action. It comes from stillness, from pauses in conversation, from looks exchanged across crowded rooms, from a man removing his glasses before meeting his death, from a wife asking a question and being met with a door closing in her face. These moments carry more weight than a dozen car explosions because they're built on narrative gravity and emotional stakes. Yet when the genre demands violence, The Godfather delivers, but with surgical precision. The acts of brutality are not stylized spectacles. They're intimate, shocking, sometimes abrupt. Think of the toll booth ambush on Sunny. It's not choreographed like a ballet. It's horrifying, chaotic, and relentless. You feel every bullet. That's the difference. In lesser genre films, violence is often cathartic or thrilling. In The Godfather, it's tragic. It's the sound of a family unraveling, of cycles continuing, of humanity being stripped away. And every act of violence has consequence. No death here is brushed aside as meaningless. Every one changes the chessboard. Perhaps the most brilliant way the film plays with genre is through Michael's transformation. Typically, in crime films, we follow a criminal's rise and fall, or a cop's descent into obsession, or a hustler's quest for survival. But in The Godfather, we start with a man who seems outside of it all. Michael is clean-cut. He's a war hero. He loves an outsider, an educated woman with no connection to the mob. He represents the hope of something new. And then, slowly, he is pulled back in, not because of greed or thrill-seeking, but because of love, loyalty, and revenge. His descent is not flamboyant. It's methodical. And it's haunting. The tragedy of the film isn't that Michael becomes the Don. It's how naturally he does. He doesn't resist with passion. He steps into it quietly, calculatingly, as if it was always in his blood. That arc redefines what a gangster protagonist can be. Instead of a rise and fall story, this is a rise and consolidation story. Michael doesn't collapse. He solidifies. And that makes the genre all the more chilling. The Godfather also subverts the idea that crime films have to be male-dominated spectacles of macho bravado. While the story is undeniably centered on men, the emotional impact is often carried by women, by Kay's increasing isolation, by Connie's devastating loss, by the silent, sidelined presence of mothers and wives watching their husbands disappear into a world they're not allowed to enter. These characters may not always speak often, but their silence is part of the tragedy. The genre usually pushes these roles into the background, but here, their emotional reactions deepen the entire world. When Kay asks Michael about Carlo's murder and is met with denial, then a door shutting in her face, that one moment flips the entire genre on its head. Instead of ending with a man triumphing over enemies, it ends with a woman being locked out, physically, emotionally, symbolically. That's how The Godfather redefines where the center of tragedy lies. Even the way humor is used is a genre innovation. Most crime films swing between grim and gritty or stylized and cool. The Godfather manages to inject quiet, bone-dry humor without ever breaking tone. There's a wryness in the way Clemenza delivers. Leave the gun. Take the cannoli. There's absurdity in a man practicing a speech for the Don like he's meeting a king. But the film never winks. It treats its characters and their world with absolute seriousness, allowing humor to exist organically through personality, not punchlines. The Godfather also expands the genre's world geographically and thematically. This isn't a tight urban crime tale. It's global. There's Sicily, with its sun-baked hills and generational blood feuds. There's Las Vegas, where family values give way to commercial greed. There's the political manipulation of judges, senators, and the police. The Mafia in this film isn't just a gang, it's a shadow government. A rival system with its own codes, rules, and economic reach. The genre had flirted with this idea before, but The Godfather makes it tangible, vast, and terrifyingly believable. And what about style? Crime films of the era often went for slickness or documentary realism. The Godfather brings in classical, almost regal visual language. Long, patient takes. Rich, shadow-drenched lighting. Ornate interiors that feel like places of worship or royal chambers. The look of the film signals that we're not watching petty thugs. We're watching dynastic kings and princes in slow-motion civil war. The genre wasn't used to being this elegant, this painterly. this solemn. But it fits like a glove. The Godfather also does something rare in the genre. It lingers in the aftermath. In most gangster movies, a death is a scene, and then it's over. Here, the film makes space for the emotional residue. After Sonny's death, there's not just grief, there's unraveling. Connie's cries, Vito's sadness, Michael's cold resolve. The film doesn't just give you action, it gives you what comes after action, the part most crime films skip past in favor of the next plot point. And in doing so, it brings real emotional weight to the genre. So in every way that matters, The Godfather not only honors the genre, it expands it. It treats the world of organized crime not as chaos, but as order. Not as rebellion, but as tradition. It trades action for consequence, noise for control, spectacle for intimacy. It's not content to be another entry in the genre. It becomes the genre's gold standard. The one that turned gangsters into tragic heroes, hitmen into mythological figures, and genre filmmaking into high art. Every crime film that came after either paid homage to it or tried desperately to avoid its long shadow. And even then, you can still hear its voice in the distance, calmly making offers no filmmaker can refuse. The social and cultural commentary in The Godfather doesn't come at you with flashing lights or speeches. It seeps in through every scene, every interaction, every family dinner, and whispered threat. It's not just a film about organized crime. It's a haunting reflection of how power operates in America, how systems of authority, identity, economy, religion, and family can quietly enable and normalize corruption, all while wearing the mask of tradition and respectability. And that's what makes the film such a masterwork. It doesn't feel like it's trying to teach you anything, but by the time it's over, you've been taught everything. Start with the immigrant experience. At its heart, The Godfather is about a family trying to survive and succeed in a country that doesn't welcome them with open arms. Vito Corleone is a product of the old world, an orphan who flees Sicily after violence takes his family. He arrives in America and, like so many immigrants, faces poverty, discrimination, and systemic neglect. But instead of assimilating into the American dream, he builds his own version of it, through cunning, control, and force. What the system wouldn't give him, he takes. And in doing so, he becomes the quintessential American success story, just not the one you read about in textbooks. There's an ironic beauty to the fact that Vito, a criminal by law, becomes a source of protection and justice for people who've been abandoned by the institutions that are supposed to serve them. Police, judges, and politicians are either ineffectual or corrupt, while Don Corleone delivers swift, decisive results. No red tape, no legal hurdles, no appeals. It's not that people want to live under the shadow of the mob. It's that the official system has failed them so thoroughly that this underground one feels more stable. That idea, that marginalized communities sometimes turn to their own power structures because mainstream ones fail them, is one of the most powerful social commentaries the film offers. And it does so without a single lecture. The film also explores capitalism with a knife-edge sharpness. Everything in the Corleone world is framed as business. Murder? Business. Betrayal? Business. Vengeance? Still business. It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business. That one line becomes a cold mantra repeated throughout the film. And yet, the irony is that everything is personal in this world. The myth of clean capitalism, where emotional detachment and efficiency rule, is completely undercut by a reality where every decision is tangled in blood ties, loyalty, and honor. The Godfather doesn't present the Mafia as a rebellion against capitalism. It presents it as a perfect mirror of it. Ruthless, opportunistic, efficient, but dressed in civility and tradition. Religion also plays a sly but potent role in the film's commentary. The Catholic Church is everywhere, baptisms, weddings, funerals, but rarely as a source of moral clarity. Instead, it's used as a shield, a stage, a symbol of legitimacy. The most iconic example, of course, is the baptism scene where Michael renounces Satan in a church while his enemies are slaughtered one by one across the city. It's operatic, beautiful, and terrifying. And it tells you everything about how power can be sanitized by ritual. Michael doesn't need to be forgiven. He just needs to look like he's righteous. The film critiques the ease with which institutions, whether religious or political, can be co-opted by the very forces they claim to oppose. Gender roles in The Godfather are rigid, oppressive, and often heartbreaking. The world of the Mafia is deeply patriarchal, and the women in the story are mostly outsiders looking in, or insiders kept in the dark. Kay is emblematic of this. She begins the film full of hope and trust in Michael, believing she can be part of his world without being consumed by it. But by the end, she's isolated, deceived, and symbolically locked out as the door closes on her face. That final image isn't just personal, it's cultural. It's a brutal commentary on how women are sidelined in systems built by and for powerful men. Connie's story drives the point home even further. She's used as a political pawn, married off for alliance, and when she suffers abuse, the men do nothing until it's convenient for their revenge. Her pain is only actionable when it serves the business. That speaks volumes about how women's agency is controlled, restricted, and often ignored entirely. The American dream looms large over the entire film. In theory, this is a story of upward mobility, a family rising from the ashes of poverty to control an empire. But The Godfather constantly asks, at what cost? The Corleones gain wealth, status, and influence, but lose their souls in the process. Vito sacrifices peace for power. Michael sacrifices his marriage, his morality, his humanity. By the end of the film, the American dream hasn't just failed, it's been redefined. Success no longer means freedom and dignity. It means survival, control, and dominance, regardless of the body count. And perhaps the film's most chilling suggestion is that this isn't a distortion of the American dream, it's the dark truth at its core. Even the way the film handles politics is strikingly relevant. The Mafia doesn't just bribe police officers, they own senators. They dictate union votes. They manipulate the justice system. And most importantly, they do it quietly. There are no campaign speeches or scandals. Just phone calls, favors, and nods in dimly lit rooms. It's a reminder that real power doesn't shout, it whispers. And often, the people you think are in charge are simply figureheads, while the true decisions are made behind closed doors by men whose names you never hear. This critique of invisible influence and quiet corruption is just as sharp now as it was in the 1970s, and likely sharper. And then there's culture itself, specifically Italian-American culture. The film doesn't reduce it to stereotypes or caricatures. It shows a world of complex traditions, rituals, and loyalties. The Sunday dinners, the baptisms, the respect for elders, these are all elements that humanize the family even as they do monstrous things. But the film also questions how these cultural bonds can be weaponized. Loyalty becomes manipulation. Family becomes obligation. Tradition becomes justification. The beauty of the culture is real, but so is its potential to trap people in cycles of violence. The film doesn't condemn, it reflects. Ultimately, The Godfather operates like a cultural X-ray machine. It scans through the surface story of gangsters and vendettas to reveal the deeper structure of society, the way institutions fail the vulnerable, the way systems of power hide behind tradition, and the way people trade morality for survival. Every character is navigating a world where right and wrong aren't divided by law, but by loyalty. Every institution, marriage, religion, capitalism, even the justice system, is bent into the service of those who understand how to use it. And that's the brilliance of the film's commentary. It never preaches. It doesn't need to. The message is in the details, in the glances, in the rituals, in the silence. You watch and slowly you realize, this isn't just about them. It's about us. The world we live in. The rules we accept. The bargains we make. The myths we believe. And the way power so often wears the face of family, faith, and tradition, even when it's built on blood. The emotional engagement of The Godfather is a slow-burning force, like a fire that doesn't blaze but smolders, growing hotter and deeper the longer you sit with it. It's not a film that shouts to hold your attention. It whispers. It beckons. And by the time you realize how invested you are, it's already too late to pull back. This is a film that doesn't just entertain, it binds itself to your emotional core, weaving dread, fascination, heartbreak, and awe into a seamless, unforgettable experience. From the very beginning, the audience isn't thrown into chaos, they're invited into intimacy. The film opens not with a bang, but with a quiet plea for justice, spoken to a man who sits in shadow. This isn't an action movie's call to arms, it's a call to listen. And in that silence, in that slow pacing, the emotional grip begins. You're not just watching people talk. You're reading between every line, waiting for the moment when the stillness breaks. This careful emotional calibration creates a kind of tension that's deeply immersive. It's not about what's happening, it's about what's coming. That's the first hook. And once it's in, it never lets go. What makes The Godfather so profoundly affecting is its ability to build emotional stakes through restraint. The big moments hit because the film earns them. You feel the tension simmering before Michael pulls the trigger in the restaurant. You feel the dread creeping in during Sonny's last, desperate dash to his sister. You feel the weight of Michael's transformation long before he ever gives an order to kill. And when these moments finally erupt, the emotional payoff is massive. Not because they're shocking in a cheap way, but because they're inevitable. You knew it was coming. And still it hurts. But beyond the moments of intensity, there's a constant thread of tragedy that pulses through every frame. You're watching not just a crime saga, but the slow-motion collapse of humanity under the weight of power, family, and legacy. Michael's descent isn't flashy, it's subtle. And because it's so believable, it's emotionally devastating. Here's a man who had a chance at a normal life. A man who loved, who had honor, who wanted nothing to do with the family business. And yet, piece by piece, that man disappears. The audience doesn't just witness this change, they feel it, mourn it, fight it. You keep waiting for Michael to pull back, to escape, to prove he's different. But he never does. And when he finally becomes the very thing he swore he wouldn't, it lands not as a twist, but as a gut punch. One of the most brilliant aspects of the film's emotional design is its use of duality. There's beauty and horror, tenderness and brutality, loyalty and betrayal, all playing side by side. The most emotionally gripping example of this is the infamous baptism scene. On one side, we have Michael calmly standing as godfather to his nephew, vowing to renounce evil and guide the child with faith. On the other, we see his enemies being executed one by one. The contrast is staggering. The emotional impact doesn't come from the violence alone, it comes from the disconnect. The coldness. The orchestration. It's terrifying, yes, but it's also deeply sad. The man you once rooted for is now orchestrating death with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. That emotional complexity stays with the audience. You don't just react. You reflect. And it's not all darkness. The film gives you moments of joy, warmth, and even humor, small windows into what the Corleone family might have been without the crime. There are weddings, dances, family dinners, scenes of laughter and familiarity. These aren't just there to break the tension. They're there to humanize the characters, to show you what's at stake. Vito playing in the garden with his grandson isn't just a sweet moment. It's a reminder of what's been lost, of the innocence that still exists on the fringes of this brutal world. These emotional contrasts enrich the film's texture, making the tragedy more profound. Audience engagement also comes from The Godfather's hypnotic storytelling style. Its pacing is deliberate, not slow, but unhurried. It invites viewers to sink into the atmosphere, to notice the subtext, to engage with every nuance. And this creates a kind of mental engagement that few films sustain. You're not just reacting, you're interpreting. You're studying the way characters move, how they speak, what they don't say. That kind of storytelling demands attention and rewards it. Viewers feel like participants in the story, not just observers. The Godfather also thrives on the power of silence. Not every emotional moment is drenched in music or dialogue. Some of the film's most haunting scenes are nearly wordless. Vito's funeral. The final door closing on Kay. These quiet moments allow the audience space to feel. You're not being told how to react. You're left to experience the emotional weight on your own terms. And that kind of trust in the audience creates a bond that's rare in cinema. Then, there's the matter of discussion. The Godfather is the kind of film that demands to be talked about endlessly. People walk away from it not just quoting lines, but debating moral choices, dissecting character arcs, analyzing themes of power and legacy. Everyone sees something different. Some admire Michael's logic. Others fear it. Some mourn Vito. Others blame him. The film doesn't give easy answers, and that's why audiences return to it. It invites you to reflect, not just on the characters, but on your own beliefs about family, leadership, justice, and fate. And finally, the film's emotional reach stretches across generations. It's not tied to a specific time or culture. It speaks to something universal. The fear of losing control. The pressure of expectation. The burden of inheritance. The desperation to protect the people you love, even if it destroys you in the process. Whether you're watching it for the first time or the 15th, those feelings never fade. If anything, they grow. You notice new details. You feel things you didn't before. It becomes personal in a way few films ever do. So yes, The Godfather makes audiences gasp, tear up, sit in stunned silence. But more than that, it transforms them. It burrows in and lives there. It doesn't just create strong reactions, it creates lasting ones. You don't just remember what you saw. You remember how it felt. And that's the kind of emotional engagement that turns a great film into a timeless one. When you stack The Godfather against other films in its genre, in its franchise, or even within Francis Ford Coppola's legendary body of work, what you begin to realize is this. The Godfather didn't walk into a tradition, it created one. It wasn't just a milestone for crime cinema, it reset the standard for storytelling across genres. It took something that had, until then, been flashy, melodramatic, and often morally simplistic, mob movies, and elevated it to something timeless, poetic, and painfully human. This wasn't just another crime flick. It was art disguised as organized crime, tragedy wrapped in tradition, and ambition masked by loyalty. Let's start with its place in the gangster genre. Before The Godfather, gangster films were largely defined by archetypes. You had the tough-talking wise guy, the ambitious thug, the doomed antihero. Films like Little Caesar and Scarface, 1932, gave us high-octane characters living fast and dying faster. These films were gritty and fun, sure, but they were also simple. Good versus bad, crime versus order, law versus chaos. Then The Godfather came in and completely rewired the framework. It didn't portray gangsters as cartoonish outlaws or societal pests. It presented them as men with families, histories, beliefs, and codes of conduct. Suddenly, the criminal underworld didn't look like a sideshow. It looked like a mirror held up to corporate America, to political dynasties, to human nature itself. Compare that to Goodfellas, often seen as the other titan of mob cinema. Where The Godfather is operatic and restrained, Goodfellas is electric and chaotic. Scorsese gives us the frenetic, fast-paced world of wise guys who crave power but have no structure or legacy. It's flashy, violent, and deliberately messy. The Godfather, by contrast, is regal, patient, steeped in ceremony. It's about the cost of power, not the thrill of acquiring it. You can feel the weight of every decision, every betrayal. While Goodfellas feels like a sprint towards self-destruction, The Godfather is a slow-motion tragedy that unfolds like fate. Both are masterpieces, but they operate on different frequencies. Goodfellas is instinct. The Godfather is inevitability. Even within its own franchise, The Godfather stands out as uniquely measured and intimate. The Godfather Part 2 is broader and more ambitious. It spans continents and generations, contrasting Vito's rise with Michael's fall. It gives you more story, more politics, more devastation. It's colder, sharper, and arguably more daring in its structure. But the original remains the emotional anchor. It's the part of the saga where everything still feels just within reach. You still believe Michael might escape. You still believe Vito's world might survive. The heartbreak of the sequel hits harder precisely because the original lays such a powerful emotional foundation. The original has a warmth and solemnity the sequels never quite recapture, because by then, the innocence is gone. Part 3, often debated among fans, is perhaps the most interesting comparison, not because it matches the first film's quality, but because it shows what happens when the formula begins to falter. It tries to bring closure, to tie together legacy and guilt, but it doesn't strike with the same force. The tone feels off, the characters less defined, and the magic less potent. And that contrast only makes the first film shine brighter. The Godfather wasn't just lightning in a bottle. It was the rare film where every piece clicked perfectly. The writing, the casting, the cinematography, the music, the timing in American culture. When a franchise begins with such a flawless opening note, even strong follow-ups will inevitably feel like echoes. Now, let's widen the lens to Coppola's broader career. This is a man who directed Apocalypse Now, The Conversation, Dracula, and Tucker, The Man and His Dream. He's no stranger to risk, scale, and style. But The Godfather is where all of his strengths converge. His skill for character introspection, for visual storytelling, for tension, for quiet emotional devastation, it's all crystallized in this one film. Apocalypse Now might be louder, more experimental, more epic, but The Godfather is tighter, more classical, more enduring. Where Apocalypse Now tears at the edges of sanity, The Godfather watches it decay slowly, one decision at a time. And when you compare The Godfather to similar prestige dramas or cinematic epics outside the crime genre, like Citizen Kane, Lawrence of Arabia, There Will Be Blood, or The Deer Hunter, what sets it apart is how it blends the mythic and the intimate. It gives you grand themes of power, loyalty, and destiny, but wraps them in the quiet personal decisions of one man trying to hold a family together. Every major event in the film is grounded in something human. A promise, a funeral, a wedding, a phone call. It never loses sight of the people behind the empire. That's the core of its brilliance. In terms of visual storytelling, The Godfather also raised the bar. Its cinematography and lighting, Gordon Willis's signature chiaroscuro style, became the gold standard for cinematic atmosphere. Dark rooms, glowing table lamps, deep shadows across faces. It created a visual language that spoke of secrecy, legacy, and death without a single word. Countless films have mimicked that look, from The Untouchables to American Gangster to Boardwalk Empire. But it never feels quite the same. The Godfather doesn't use shadow for drama. It uses it for meaning. Light and darkness are not just aesthetic choices. They're emotional cues, narrative punctuation. And then, of course, there's the influence. Everything that came after, every serious crime drama, every morally complex antihero, every exploration of legacy and power through a family dynamic, owes something to The Godfather. Tony Soprano, Walter White, Tommy Shelby, even Michael Corleone's own spiritual descendants in shows like Succession, they're all part of a lineage that began in that office with the orange light and the man in the chair granting favors on his daughter's wedding day. What makes The Godfather feel fresh, even now, is that it doesn't cling to formula. It's not interested in cheap twists, relentless action, or moral clarity. It's slow, methodical, filled with silences that say more than monologues. It trusts the audience to read between the lines, to feel the tension without being handheld. That's the kind of narrative courage that's rare even today. So when you ask how The Godfather compares, the answer isn't just that it holds up, it's that it still leads. It didn't just do something different. It created the blueprint. And while others have followed it, imitated it, paid homage to it, or tried to break away from it, the truth remains. There's before The Godfather, and there's after. Very few films can claim that. This one can. And it doesn't need to remind you of its greatness. You feel it frame by frame, word by word, silence by silence. The symbolism and metaphors in The Godfather don't just enrich the film. They form an invisible architecture that shapes the way we feel, think, and interpret every moment. This isn't a story told in broad strokes. It's told in shadows, fruit bowls, door frames, rituals, and silences. Every detail carries weight, and many of them whisper truths that characters themselves never speak aloud. Coppola doesn't simply show you a crime saga. He lets you decode it piece by piece. It's like a sacred text of cinema, where meaning isn't just in the dialogue or plot, but in the placement of a lamp, the color of a shirt, the framing of a shot. Watching The Godfather isn't just viewing a film, it's reading it line by visual line. Let's talk about the oranges again, because they're perhaps the most famous example of visual metaphor in the film, and for good reason. You'll notice them in Vito's shopping cart before he's gunned down. You'll see them on the table during key conversations, or spilled on the ground in the garden at his death. They symbolize death, or more accurately, its approach. But they also serve as a quiet commentary on the illusion of safety. What's more harmless than fruit? And yet in this world, even sweetness is a prelude to blood. The oranges work as a visual wink, a dark premonition tucked into the background, daring the viewer to connect the dots. They become the film's cinematic version of a ticking clock. It's not loud, but once you hear it, it never stops. Now turn your attention to the doors, especially the doors that close. The final shot of the film is arguably one of the most loaded visual metaphors in movie history. Michael, having lied to Kay about ordering Carlo's death, is left alone in his study. As his new underlings arrive to kiss his hand and acknowledge him as the new Don, Kay watches from a distance, eyes full of uncertainty and heartbreak. And then the door closes. It's simple, quiet, and devastating. That door doesn't just shut Kay out of the room, it shuts her out of Michael's life. It marks the point of no return, where the man she loved becomes someone else. A son has become a Don, a husband has become a myth, and the man who once wanted nothing to do with his family's business now embodies it completely. That door is a final, visual punctuation mark on the film's entire emotional arc. Let's move to religion. The baptism scene is the most operatic example of dual symbolism. On one level, it's a montage, a baby being baptized while 5 murders are carried out. But on another level, it's a devastating collision of two worlds, the sacred and the profane. Michael stands in a church, renouncing evil and affirming his role as Godfather, both to the child and, in an unholy twist, to the family empire. He speaks words of piety while blood is spilled at his command. This isn't just irony. It's a commentary on the performative nature of morality in systems of power. The church offers forgiveness, but Michael uses ritual as camouflage. He doesn't reject evil, he perfects it under the guise of tradition. This duality becomes a recurring visual and thematic motif. What is seen versus what is meant. Even light and shadow tell a story. Gordon Willis, the cinematographer nicknamed the Prince of Darkness, doesn't light faces like other films do. Often, the Corleone's eyes are hidden in shadow. Their expressions are unreadable. This isn't just for mood, it's symbolic of the internal and external secrecy that defines the family. The deeper Michael descends into the role of Don, the darker his face becomes on screen. His moral clarity erodes, and his image visually reflects that change. Early in the film, he's well-lit, framed like a traditional protagonist. By the end, he's a silhouette, cold, hard, unknowable. Light becomes an emotional tool, a way of reflecting not only what's happening, but who the characters are becoming. The garden holds rich symbolic meaning, especially in Vito's final moments. A garden is a place of life, growth, innocence, an almost Edenic retreat from the harshness of the criminal world. And that's where Vito dies, chasing his grandson around the tomato plants. The image is hauntingly tender. After a lifetime of control, violence, and calculated power, he dies in one of the few truly peaceful, playful moments in the film. He doesn't die in a hail of bullets. He doesn't collapse on a throne. He dies covered in tomato juice, laughing. It's an image drenched in irony and poetic release, a king laid to rest not by his enemies, but by time, in a setting untouched by the empire he built. The garden becomes a metaphor for return, for simplicity, for the small beauty that even men like Vito still long for. There's also the metaphor of the family itself. The family is both literal and symbolic. It's a source of strength, protection, and identity, but also a trap. Characters constantly talk about doing things for the family, even when those things are monstrous. The Corleone family operates like a traditional American family on the surface. Sunday dinners, weddings, baptisms, but beneath that surface is a hierarchy built on fear and absolute loyalty. It's the illusion of warmth hiding a ruthless machine. That contradiction is the beating heart of the film. The more you try to protect the family, the more you risk losing what made it worth protecting. And then there's Michael himself, a walking metaphor. He begins as the clean, college-educated war hero. He's not like them, he says. He's going to be different. But every choice he makes drags him closer to the man he swore he wouldn't become. His transformation isn't sudden. It's a slow, tragic surrender. He becomes the metaphor for the American dream turned sour. A man who wants to build something pure, but in the process becomes a tyrant. His arc mirrors the country's post-war loss of innocence, a metaphor for how power always exacts a cost, even when it's sought for noble reasons. Even the puppeteer logo in the title, those strings above the Godfather text, carry meaning. They tell you this is a story about control, about who pulls the strings, and about how, eventually, everyone becomes both puppet and master. It's a visual cue that says this isn't just about crime. It's about systems, legacy, fate, and the invisible hand of power manipulating every move. Symbolism in The Godfather isn't just decoration. It's foundation. It works invisibly, burrowing into your subconscious, guiding your emotions without ever drawing attention to itself. That's why the film rewards repeat viewings. The more you look, the more you find. And the more you find, the more you realize just how meticulously built this story is, not just as a narrative, but as a visual poem, a philosophical statement, and a masterclass in meaning layered beneath every frame. When you fully explore The Godfather in terms of its place within a franchise and its historical context, you start to see that the film isn't just a cinematic landmark. It's a cultural reckoning, a sweeping chronicle of transformation, both personal and national. It doesn't merely contribute to a trilogy. It defines what a saga can be. It creates a mythos so rich, so layered, and so resonant that the characters stop feeling like fictional creations and start to feel like American folklore, larger-than-life figures woven into the moral and historical fabric of the 20th century. Let's start with the franchise angle and understand how The Godfather lays the groundwork for everything that follows. Most franchises introduce characters, a world, maybe a plot thread or two that future installments can pick up. But The Godfather is something different. It begins with legacy already looming large. The weight of the past, the expectations of the future, and the erosion of the present all coexist in a single narrative thread. The first film isn't just about the rise of Michael Corleone. It's about the slow, calculated disappearance of who he once was. And that arc is so intricately crafted, so subtly devastating, that it provides an emotional anchor for every moment of the two sequels. Part 2 doesn't function unless we first believe in the tragedy of Michael's transformation. His coldness in the sequel hits harder because we remember the man who once said, "That's my family, Kay. It's not me." We saw him try to resist the pull. And when we see him isolated, paranoid, sitting in a dark room staring into nothing in Part 2, we feel the full weight of that journey, because Part 1 gave it its soul. The first film gives us a man turning away from violence and slowly being devoured by it, moment by moment, decision by decision. And because we witnessed every step of that transformation in real time, the second film becomes a haunting deep dive into the price of that transformation. Part 3, for all its flaws, ties the loop by confronting the one thing Michael has avoided all along, the consequences of his choices. It gives us the fallout, the guilt, the irreparable damage to his soul. In that way, The Godfather isn't just the first part of a trilogy, it's the emotional spine of a Greek tragedy stretched across generations. And what's incredible is that it tells a deeply personal story, a son stepping into his father's shoes, that feels so universal because it's draped in the language of power, morality, and identity. You could remove the mob setting, and the emotional beats would still hit. The pull of tradition, the seduction of control, the fear of losing oneself in a role that can't be undone. Now, let's zoom out and look at The Godfather through the historical lens, not just as a narrative, but as a cultural artifact. The film is set in the late 1940s, but its creation in the early 1970s matters enormously. This was an America coming out of the idealism of the 1960s, fractured by Vietnam, disillusioned by Watergate, shaken by civil rights struggles. Trust in institutions was crumbling. The idea of the American dream was starting to crack. And here comes The Godfather, a film that says, in no uncertain terms, that power always comes with blood. That behind every empire is a graveyard. That even in a land of opportunity, real success comes not from hard work or morality, but from how well you play the game and how much you're willing to sacrifice. The Corleones might be fictional, but the world they operate in is disturbingly familiar. The judges, the cops, the senators, they all bend under the weight of money and influence. The mob in this story isn't an outside threat to the system. It is the system, just wearing a different mask. And that subtle parallel is what gives the film its chilling power. It doesn't ask you to fear criminals in the shadows. It asks you to question who really holds the strings in your own world. And that message resonated deeply in 1972 and still resonates today. From a historical accuracy standpoint, while the events aren't based on specific real incidents, the film nails the texture of the time. The cars, the clothing, the architecture, the social norms, it all feels lived in and authentic. But more importantly, it captures the emotional reality of the post-war immigrant experience. Vito Corleone's story, expanded in the second film but foreshadowed here, is the story of the American immigrant, arriving with nothing, building a life through whatever means are available, and passing down both opportunity and burden to the next generation. The film treats this not with pity or propaganda, but with a quiet, melancholy reverence. You see in Vito's eyes the pride of survival, the pain of compromise, and the unspoken fear that everything he's built might destroy the very family it was meant to protect. Coppola uses that historical setting to explore massive themes with incredible nuance. How tradition collides with progress, how identity splinters under the weight of ambition, how systems of power feed on loyalty until there's nothing left but silence. These aren't themes that fade with time. In fact, as modern audiences rewatch the film, they find new meaning in every political shift, every generational crisis. The Godfather keeps evolving in its relevance because it understands something essential about how history repeats itself, not just on a national level, but within every family. So whether you're seeing The Godfather as the first movement in a grand cinematic symphony, or as a haunting time capsule of post-war America's darkest truths, it remains a masterpiece of world-building, character evolution, and thematic depth. It isn't content with simply being the start of a story. It is the story. Everything that follows only makes sense because of the shadow it casts. And its historical resonance doesn't just come from setting, it comes from insight. It sees the past clearly, and in doing so, shows us a version of the present we're still struggling to understand. Diving even deeper into the budget and box office journey of The Godfather is like uncovering a second hidden plotline running parallel to the film itself, a real-life saga of distrust, compromise, tension, and eventually, triumph. What makes this story so rich isn't just the final dollar figures, but the drama behind them, the uphill battles fought off-screen that somehow mirrored the dark, layered conflicts playing out on screen. Let's start with the budget, because that's where the real tension begins. At the time Paramount picked up the rights to Mario Puzo's unpublished manuscript, no one knew what kind of phenomenon The Godfather would become. The novel hadn't yet exploded in popularity, so the studio didn't pay a fortune. They secured it for around $80,000, treating it like a modest gamble on a gritty mob story. Once the book did become a bestseller, the studio quickly moved to adapt it, but they still approached the production with the mentality of a controlled, tight-budget B-picture. They envisioned something lean, possibly shot on backlots or in modern-day settings with minimal period authenticity. In their minds, this was a simple genre film, not a sprawling epic. Francis Ford Coppola, on the other hand, had a completely different vision. He wasn't interested in making just another crime thriller. He saw the material as something Shakespearean, something operatic and intimate all at once. He wanted historical accuracy, rich textures, and a sense of realism that could only be captured through location shooting, authentic period design, and immersive lighting. He envisioned a world that felt lived in, rooted in the post-war Italian-American experience, not just stylistically but spiritually. And all of that required time, trust, and more importantly, money. Paramount was reluctant. The initial budget of $2.5 million was woefully insufficient for Coppola's vision, especially as he fought for shooting in New York, not backlots, 1940s-era costumes, vintage cars, and specific casting choices that weren't studio favorites. Coppola wanted Marlon Brando, then considered box office poison. He wanted Al Pacino, a relative unknown. He wanted to cast against expectations, avoid glamorizing the Mafia, and let the film breathe with long, moody takes. To the studio, this all sounded like madness. And so began a series of clashes. Coppola constantly had to justify every creative choice. Producers threatened to replace him multiple times. The studio sent observers to the set. They questioned the dark cinematography of Gordon Willis, the slow pacing, the hushed performances. But Coppola kept pushing, sometimes compromising, sometimes standing firm. The budget eventually expanded to around $6 million, still not a huge number by today's standards, but at the time, it represented a serious leap of faith by the studio. When the film finally premiered in 1972, that leap paid off in ways no one could have predicted. It didn't just perform well, it became a cultural supernova. Upon release, The Godfather made $1 million in its opening weekend alone, a staggering figure for its time. Within weeks, it had shattered box office records across the country. By the end of its original run, it had grossed over $135 million domestically and eventually surpassed $250 million worldwide. That made it not only the highest-grossing film of 1972, but, adjusted for inflation, one of the most financially successful films ever made. And it did all this without the kind of mass-market promotional blitzes we see today. The marketing for The Godfather was actually quite restrained by modern standards, and that's part of what made it so effective. The posters were stark, with the iconic puppet hand logo hovering over that bold title. The trailers gave away little, focusing more on tone than on plot. There was an aura of mystery surrounding the film, a sense that you were about to witness something serious, adult, and unlike the usual Hollywood fare. Critics started calling it America's gangster opera and comparing it to Citizen Kane, and once those words started circulating, audiences were drawn to it like moths to flame. And here's what really cemented its box office power: repeat viewings. Audiences didn't just see it once. They saw it again. And again. Word of mouth carried the film across months, and what could have been a mid-tier genre experiment turned into a blockbuster by sheer cultural momentum. People were quoting lines from it before quoting lines became a movie-going ritual. They weren't just watching a film, they were participating in a moment. And every ticket sold validated the gamble that Coppola and his team had taken, that intelligence, nuance, and patience could still draw a crowd. What's even more fascinating is how The Godfather set the financial tone for the entire trilogy. Its massive success guaranteed that Paramount would give Coppola more freedom and a bigger budget for Part 2, a film that was even more ambitious, more sprawling, and far riskier structurally. And when that sequel became another critical and commercial success, it proved that thoughtful, character-driven sagas could form franchises that weren't just profitable, but respected. By the time Part 3 arrived nearly 2 decades later, the name The Godfather carried the kind of brand recognition usually reserved for fairy tales or religious texts. All of that began with a film whose budget was barely enough, whose production was an ongoing battle, and whose box office legacy rewrote what studios thought audiences wanted. So when you talk about The Godfather in terms of budget and box office, you're not just crunching numbers. You're tracing the arc of how bold artistic risk, when married to undeniable craft, can defy every financial expectation. It's a film that went from near cancellation to cultural domination. It made studios rethink their assumptions, made audiences expect more, and made Hollywood history, not just at the Oscars, but in the ledger books too. Watching The Godfather isn't like watching just any movie. It's an experience, a ritual, almost a sacred passage into the inner circle of cinema's elite. This is a film that has transcended the screen. It has become a cultural relic, a reference point, and a masterclass in storytelling and atmosphere. And if you're going to watch it, especially for the first time, you owe it to yourself to do it right. Where you choose to watch it, and how, will dramatically shape how much of its brilliance lands with full force. Now, let's talk locations. While it's true that The Godfather was released decades ago, don't be surprised if you still find it lighting up theater marquees now and then. In fact, this film is so celebrated that it regularly returns to theaters for special events. Anniversary re-releases, film festivals, classic cinema screenings, or curated events at boutique theaters often bring it back in stunning remastered editions. If you see a chance to catch it on the big screen, take it. No hesitation. There's something entirely different about seeing Don Vito's dark office or that haunting baptism montage unfold in a full-size cinema, surrounded by silence and gasps from a crowd who, like you, are hanging on every slow-burning second. The big screen amplifies the atmosphere, deepens the shadows, and makes the silences feel heavier than dialogue. It turns a personal experience into a communal one, where you realize you're not the only one being hypnotized by this operatic dance of power and betrayal. But if a theatrical screening isn't available near you, and let's face it, for most people it won't be, you're still in luck. The Godfather is one of those rare classics that's kept alive across every platform imaginable. It often finds a permanent home on major streaming services thanks to its ongoing popularity. Whether it's included with a subscription or available to rent or purchase, it's never more than a few clicks away. And given the demand, it's usually available in high-definition formats, with both the original cut and the lovingly restored remastered editions. These aren't just polished reissues, they're painstaking frame-by-frame restorations that preserve every visual detail, every bit of grain and shadow, with cinematic reverence. Coppola and his team made sure the restored versions reflect the tone and richness of the original vision, only sharper, deeper, and better balanced. So, if you're watching from home, set the stage. Don't just throw it on casually. This isn't background noise while folding laundry or scrolling through your phone. This is a sit-down, lights-down, phone-off experience. Pour yourself something appropriate, dim the lights, turn up the volume, and let that haunting waltz drift in as the screen fades to black and the puppet strings begin to dance. The film opens not with action or spectacle, but with a whisper, a quiet plea for justice. And if you're truly locked in, that whisper grabs you more than any explosion ever could. If you're someone who loves extras, behind-the-scenes content, or the finer details of film history, then a physical copy, like a Blu-ray or the 4K Ultra HD Collector's Editions, is absolutely worth investing in. These releases are like miniature film schools. They come with commentary tracks from Coppola, cast interviews, documentaries on the making of the film, production design features, and deleted scenes that give you a fuller picture of the world behind the Corleones. You can explore how Brando improvised entire scenes, how the lighting created emotional weight, how the score was layered beneath the silence. Watching the film is one thing, but studying it, that's how you begin to understand why it changed cinema forever. And then there's the trilogy. Many editions bundle The Godfather with Part 2 and Part 3, allowing you to immerse yourself in the entire arc from beginning to end. It's an emotional, moral, and psychological journey that unfolds across decades. And watching them together gives you a sweeping understanding of how far Michael Corleone falls, how heavy the weight of power becomes, and how nothing, nothing, comes without a cost. If you have the time, watching all three back-to-back, even over a few nights, adds massive impact to the first film. You'll see small lines, glances, and choices in Part 1 echo tragically across the sequels. But even if you only watch the original, do it with reverence. Watch it the way you'd attend a grand opera or visit a historic landmark. Let yourself fall into it. Notice the little things, the way the camera lingers, how the light cuts across characters' faces, the musical cues that signal shifts in loyalty or emotion. Notice how the story doesn't rush, how it builds tension by slowing down instead of speeding up. The Godfather teaches you how to watch movies differently. It asks you to lean in, to listen closely, to read between the lines. So, wherever you are, home theater, bedroom, or an old cinema tucked away in some downtown corner, just know that you're not just watching a film. You're joining a tradition. You're stepping into a space shared by generations of movie lovers who've all sat back, watched that wedding scene fade into menace, and felt that quiet shiver when Michael says, "Don't ever take sides against the family again." No matter where you press play, if you give the film your full attention, The Godfather will reward it 100-fold. And once you've seen it properly, you'll never forget it. You'll hear the music in your head at unexpected times. You'll quote it without realizing. You'll understand why people speak of it not just as a movie, but as a moment in time that never really ended.